So I think the biggest reason we all study astrology is we want to figure out more about ourselves and the world at large. And a big part of learning about ourselves is we want to learn what we're good at. And honestly, there is no shame in that. And so in this video, I will go over what your talent is in astrology or what your talents are, because you have a lot. And we're going to go over this whether you want to, maybe use that talent to make something out of your life. Maybe you just want a pick-me-up. Everybody wants to hear what they're good at. Don't lie. And with Jupiter entering Leo, I think there's honestly nothing wrong with that. Or maybe you're just curious what you're good at. Or maybe you know what you're good at and you kind of want to validate that and see how it plays into your birth chart. And I'm not going to lie, there is a lot of, elements or factors in the birth chart that can contribute to talent. And so just for the simplicity of this video, I want to strip it down into 3 core houses. And we're not just going to look at the sign of the houses that are, involved in talent. I want to look at the placement of the ruling planet of each house by sign and house, just to make it that much more personalized. And so we will be going into the 1st house, the 3rd house, and the 5th house. And so part of the reason why I want to go into the rising sign and the chart ruler is, if you think about what a talent is naturally, it's essentially something that does come naturally to you, whether it's a skill or an ability. And your rising sign plus your chart ruler will tell you kind of the natural energy you possess. And I'm just inclined to believe that any trait you have can be turned into a skill. And maybe that's just my Mercury and North Node in the 2nd house talking. And so you can see what your skill is based on your rising sign. But maybe you want to learn more about, your mental talents, what you're good at intellectually, or how you can, apply your talents to hands-on skills. And so the 3rd house is the capacity for communication. It's how you process information. It's the way your mind works. It's the way you speak. But also something that the 3rd house doesn't get enough credit for is it's your hands-on skills, because the 3rd house is all about the immediate environment. So it's how you work with your hands. I will use the term manual dexterity because that's kind of what it is. And so if you want to figure out what your skills are with that, we will be talking about the sign of your 3rd house plus the ruler or the dispositor of your 3rd house by sign and house. And then you probably also may want to know your creative and expressive talent. And so we will be going into the 5th house. The 5th house is literally what and how we create, just for the joy of it. And creation, for reference, can touch on anything. It doesn't just touch on art or performance. Think of the scope of what we can actually create. We can create spaces, plans, environments. It's a lot more nuanced than art. So if you want to figure out what you can create and how you can create, we will be talking about the 5th house and the dispositor of your 5th house by sign and house. And so we have a lot of information to get into. Not gonna lie, I've already filmed these sections. My voice kind of hurts. And so you probably just want to get into it. And so let's get into your talents. Go down to your timestamps, find your placements, and let's get into it in 3, 2, 1, go.
So because Aries risings are ruled by the planet Mars, it can bring overall skills related to instinct, action, and how you navigate using the body's natural drive and motivation. And depending on the sign and house of your chart ruler, it could bring skills of athleticism, an ability to respond to crisis, maybe decisiveness, a drive to push things forward, leadership, settings where quick decisions are made, strategy, and any skill that involves movement, whether subtle or major. And so you could inspire movement from your environment. You could have a talent for overcoming inertia, but also even in highly analytical or less intense pursuits, you could find a talent in settings where you are asked to break a stalemate, cut through stagnation, or to take a risk to initiate sudden progress. But this obviously won't be your only talents because the birth chart is nuanced. These could just be general ones you can naturally have due to these traits being part of your default setting. But the nature of the sign and house Mars is in will provide more insight. So I do recommend you looking at the timestamps for this placement in your chart to get a better idea as to how this could look for you specifically. Taurus risings, because you are ruled by Venus, it can bring overall skills related to how you build stability. You could have aesthetic talents, and you could be very good at managing resources. And depending on the sign and house of your chart ruler, it could bring skills of artistry, maybe financial management, the ability to cultivate slow but steady growth, an eye for creating maybe physical comfort and beauty. You could be good at architectural design. You could have patience in overseeing long-term long-term projects. You could even have musical talents. It's basically any skill that involves directly with the physical senses, whether it's culinary arts or body work. You could have a knack for preserving resources, but also even in fast-paced or highly abstract digital pursuits, you could find talent in settings where you are asked to ground, maybe these out there concepts into something enduring, sustainable, and highly functional. But this obviously won't be your only talents because the birth chart is nuanced. Just some general ones you can consider. But the nature of the sign and house Venus is in will provide more insight. So I do recommend you looking at the timestamps for your placement in the chart to get a better idea as to how this can look for you specifically. Gemini risings, because you're ruled by Mercury, it could bring overall skills related to communication, intellect, how you gather and synthesize information, and depending on the sign and house of the chart ruler, it could bring skills of writing, public speaking, the ability to quickly synthesize multiple streams of information. You could be good at teaching. You could have extreme adaptability in changing environments. You could be very good at problem solving, data analysis, any skills that involve translating complex ideas so that others can understand them. You could have a talent for mediating conversations and networking, but also even in deeply emotional or maybe physically demanding pursuits, you could find a talent where you are asked to translate complex, unspoken experiences into clear, accessible data, or to bridge maybe severe communication gaps between opposing parties. But this obviously won't be your only talents because the birth chart is nuanced. Just some general ones you could consider, but the nature of the sign and house that Mercury is in will provide more insight. So I do recommend you looking at the timestamps for this placement in your chart to get a better idea as to how this can look for you specifically. Cancer risings, because you are ruled by the moon, it could bring overall skills related to emotional intelligence. You could be very good at growing things, like nurturing them into, maturity or health, whatever it may be. And you could know how to intuitively read your environment. But depending on the sign and house of the moon, it could bring skills of caretaking. Maybe you have a natural sense of hospitality, an intuitive grasp of psychology, the ability to maybe read emotional temperatures of people or the room. Maybe you're very good at protecting others. You could create safe and cozy spaces. You could be actually very good at working with history or memory preservation. Any skill that involves building deep community connections could also be something you are good at. You could have a talent for making people feel seen and nourished. But also, even in maybe highly analytical or even cutthroat, maybe corporate pursuits, you could find a talent in settings where you are asked to read the unspoken systemic needs, predict consumer behavioral trends, or establish the psychological safety required for a team or, whatever it is that you're pursuing to operate. But this obviously won't be your only talents because the birth chart is nuanced. Just some general ones you can consider, but the nature of the sign and house your moon is in will provide a lot more insight. So I do recommend you looking at the timestamps for this placement in your chart to get a better idea as to how this can look for you. Leo risings, you are ruled by the sun, so this could bring overall skills related to self-expression, vitality, confidence, and how you naturally command attention, even if it's not something that you want. I'm a Leo rising, trust me, I know we don't always want it, but we get it anyway. And depending on the sign and house of your sun, it could bring skills of performance, natural leadership. You could excel at creative arts. You could have a natural ability to inspire and uplift others. You could be very good at public speaking, event organizing, confidence building, and you could do good in settings where you can shine a light on important causes or projects. It's basically any skill that involves radiating warmth or putting on a show. You could have a talent for turning, something boring into something glamorous. But also, even in the behind the scenes settings, or maybe something that's deeply technical or, solitary, you could find a talent in settings where you are asked to act as a centralizing hub for a project. You could infuse a distinct identity into the work that you create or that you do, but you could also be good at generating momentum and warmth around others or around, material that would otherwise be dry. You could infuse it with life. But this obviously won't be your your only talents because the birth chart is nuanced. These are just some general ones you can consider, but the nature of the sign and the house of your sun will provide more insight. So I do recommend you looking at those timestamps to get a better idea as to how this could look for you. Virgo risings, because you're ruled by Mercury, this could bring overall skills related to analysis, refinement, and how you optimize the systems around you. And depending on the sign and house of your Mercury, you could be very good at meticulous editing, you could be good at organizing, you could have a knack for health and wellness routines, you could be very good at detailed craftsmanship, troubleshooting complex systems, maybe you're very good at administration, critical thinking. You could do good in settings where practical solutions are needed for very complex problems. It's basically any skill that involves refining and perfecting a process. You could have a talent for noticing the small details that other people miss, but also even in maybe highly abstract or creative or chaotic pursuits, you could find a talent maybe in settings where you're asked to break a grand, overwhelming vision down into actionable steps. You could refine inspiration into a functional final product or piece of art. But obviously, these won't be your only talents because the birth chart is nuanced. These are just some general ones you can consider. But the nature of the sign and house Mercury is in will provide a lot more insight. So I do recommend you looking at those timestamps for this placement in your chart to get a better idea as to how this can look for you specifically. Libra risings, because you are ruled by Venus, so jealous by the way, it can bring overall skills related to harmony, relationships, and how you balance opposing forces. You could be good at developing an opinion. And depending on the sign and house of the chart ruler, it could bring skills of mediation, maybe the ability to negotiate fair outcomes. You could have a sharp eye for design or aesthetics. You could be very diplomatic. You could be good at counseling or styling or creating art or experiences. You could also be good with public relations, settings where you must create equitable environments. Basically, any skill that involves balancing opposing forces or perspectives. You could have a talent for smoothing over conflicts and fostering harmony. But even in settings that are maybe more competitive or solitary or even technical, you could find a talent in settings where you are asked to calibrate uneven variables, find the exact center of gravity in a complex system, or negotiate outcomes that objectively stabilize the integrity of whatever it is you're building or whatever project you're a part of. But this obviously will not be your only talents because the birth chart is nuanced. Just some general ones you can consider, but the nature of the sign and house Venus is in will provide a lot more insight. So I do recommend you looking at the timestamps for this placement in your chart to get a better idea as to how this can look for you specifically. Scorpio risings, because Scorpio risings are ruled by Mars, but also Pluto, although we will only be talking about really Mars, it can bring overall skills related to transformation, focus, and how you navigate the hidden depths of situations. And depending on the sign and house of your Mars, it can bring skills of deep research, investigation, strategic planning, crisis management. You could be good at navigating emergencies, psychological healing, complex resource management. You could have the ability to uncover the truth behind the surface. You could be good in settings where deep focus and endurance are required. You could be good at any skill that involves transforming something broken into something powerful. You could also have a talent maybe behind, understanding people's hidden motives, but also even in maybe more lighthearted or highly social or superficial pursuits, you could find a talent in settings where you are asked to identify the core psychological truth of a trend or inject a level of depth that completely transfixes an audience, or maybe a result that initiates a systemic shift. But this obviously won't be your only talents because the birth chart is nuanced. Just some general ones you can consider. But the nature of the sign and house Mars, which is your traditional ruler, is in will provide a lot more insight. So I do recommend you looking at the timestamps for this placement in your chart to get a better idea as to how this can look for you specifically. Sagittarius risings, because you're ruled by the planet Jupiter, it could bring overall skills related to growth, vision, and how you can synthesize the bigger picture. And depending on the sign and house of the chart ruler, it could bring skills of teaching on a grand scale. You could be good at publishing. You could have an ability to easily navigate cross-cultural environments. You could be good at debate. You could be good at marketing and broadcasting. You could be good at forecasting future trends. You could be a good storyteller. You could be good in settings where you can guide others towards a broader horizon. And you could be good at any skill that involves exploring the unknown or synthesizing a big picture. You could have a talent for injecting optimism into a space, but also even in maybe highly granular or localized or microscopic, kind of boring or administrative pursuits. You could find a talent in settings where you are asked to identify how the smallest, seemingly insignificant variable could connect to the big picture in some way, ensuring that maybe the daily minute details always serve a grander purpose. But this obviously won't be your only talents because the birth chart is nuanced. Just some general ones you can consider. But the nature of the sign and house Jupiter's in will provide a lot more insight, trust me. So I do recommend you look at the timestamps for this placement in your chart to get a better idea as to how this can look for you specifically. Capricorn risings, because you are ruled by Saturn, it could bring overall skills related to structure, discipline, how you take on, the weight of the world, and how you build things that are meant to last. But obviously, depending on the sign and house of Saturn, it could bring skills of maybe you're very good at management, you're good at architectural planning, planning a system. You could be a very strong and capable leader. You could have an ability to execute long-term strategic planning. You could be good at building systems. You could be good at preserving history in some way. You could be good at mentoring others. You could also be good in settings where structure and discipline are needed. Basically, you could be good at any skills that involve bringing order to chaos and building things that are meant to last. You could have a talent for commanding respect in some way. But also, even in very highly fluid or emotionally driven or artistic pursuits, you could find talents in settings where maybe you're asked to provide the necessary structure to build something more fluid and beautiful. You could also provide a practical framework that allows for creativity to actually manifest, like maybe you're very good at taking the discipline of learning an art form, for example. But this obviously will not be your only talents because the birth chart is nuanced. Just some general ones you can consider. But the nature of the sign and house Saturn is in will provide more insight. So I do recommend looking at the timestamps for your Saturn placement to get a better idea as to how this can look for you. Aquarius risings, you are ruled by Saturn traditionally. Modernly, you are ruled by Uranus. We will focus on Saturn a bit more, though. This could bring overall skills related to innovation, how you manage or navigate group dynamics, and how you challenge the status quo to push something to a better state. And depending on the sign and house of your Saturn, it could bring skills involving, advanced technology. You could be good at community organizing. You could have a drive to make the world a better place. In some cases, you could be good at science or objective thinking or even astrology. You could be good at trend setting and foresight. You could be a good humanitarian worker. You could be good at networking. Basically, any setting where challenging the status quo is encouraged, or any skill that involves conceptualizing the future or moving a group to the future. You could have a talent for seeing, systemic patterns in society. I associate Aquarius with really understanding systems, but also even in maybe historical or traditional or highly intimate interpersonal pursuits, you could find a talent in settings where you are asked to view the mechanics objectively and identify exactly which outdated rules need to be changed and introduce a stabilizing but revolutionary perspective that could elevate an entire system. But obviously, this won't be your only talents because the birth chart is nuanced, just some general ones you can consider. But the nature of the sign and house Saturn is in will definitely provide more personal insight. So I do recommend you look at the timestamps for your Saturn placement to get a better idea as to how this can look for you specifically. Pisces risings, you are ruled by Jupiter traditionally. You are also ruled by Neptune. I will go into Jupiter because it is a more personal planet, which will obviously probably connect more to talent. And so this could bring overall skills related to empathy, imagination, and how you connect to the intangible. And depending on the sign and house of Jupiter, and also to a degree Neptune, it can bring skills of artistic creation. You could be good at musical composition. You could be an intuitive healer, whether it's, in a structured way or an unstructured way. You could be good at offering guidance. You could also have an eye for photography or visual arts. You could be a good counselor. You could have an ability to adapt to fluid situations, and you could be good in settings where you can translate emotional or collective currents. Any skill that involves tapping into the imagination or the intangible, a talent for deep empathy, but also even in more left-brained pursuits like math or science, you could find a talent in settings where you are asked to maybe understand a handful of variables, including ones that aren't always clear, but this obviously will not be your only talents because the birth chart is nuanced. Just some general ones to consider. But the nature of the sign and house Jupiter is then will provide a lot more insight. So I do recommend you looking at the timestamps for your placement in your birth chart just to get a better idea as to how this can look for you specifically. When your chart ruler is in Aries, your overarching energy is very forward moving, instinctual, and action oriented, and you could embody the very energy of movement. And because astrology is all about potential, your internal talents could make you very good at any pursuit involving movement. So you could be highly capable of starting a brand new business, a project, or a hobby with zero prior experience. But the trick here is finding what brings you true passion, because you likely won't move unless you are genuinely inspired. And you could also easily trust a gut feeling without needing to see proof. You probably have a good gut, which could be incredibly useful in high stakes environments like medicine, for example, that require quick reaction times. Furthermore, you could have a knack for maybe physically moving your body to burn off stress or to solve a problem, which could serve as a tool for breaking through stagnation, which, trust me, not everybody's good at that. In your interactions in the real world, this energy could make you very fierce. You could have a natural ability to speak up or make a move when the room is completely quiet, making you a fantastic brainstormer. You could also excel at making quick decisions while everybody else is still debating, which could bring out strong leadership abilities in settings that require quick choices. Socially, you could also be the type to defend a stranger or a friend the exact second somebody disrespects them, making you a good advocate if that is something that is calling to you. And you could also possess an independent capability where you could truly thrive when you're working solo, even if your Mars is in a very diplomatic sign like Libra. And so ultimately, confronting an issue directly could make you exceptionally good at managing your time and cutting out unnecessary noise. And now, obviously, how this manifests will depend on which planet is your chart ruler, which is why I put some general talents for each planet on the screen for you to check out. And so to experiment with these talents, try doing one thing without asking anybody else for a second opinion, and let your instincts make the call and see how it feels to, listen to your gut or to take that action, and experiment with the way you move and find a pace for pursuing things that comes naturally so that you can understand how you operate and better tap into your skills. When your chart ruler is in Taurus, your overarching energy is very steady, methodical, and grounded, and you represent the sign that roots us to the earth. But because astrology is all about potential, your internal talents could show up in your ability to build and sustain. You could be gifted at building resources or skills slowly over an extended period. And if there's a craft you want to pursue, even if you're only at step one, you're a beginner, you could find that you have the energetic support to build exactly what you need as long as you apply yourself to that. And you could also possess a sense of reliability. You could refuse to change your mind once you have established the facts, which could make you a highly consistent voice in any setting you put yourself in. And when it comes to logistics, maybe managing a budget or even just managing your resources in general, this could also be something that you easily excel at simply because you do not miss a variable. Out in the world, you could excel at creating experiences of luxury, relaxation, and physical comfort. And so, whether it's cooking a meal or establishing a space, you could have a natural ability to soothe your own nervous system as well as the nervous systems of those around you. And you could have an eye for high quality items that will last a lifetime. And maybe you don't buy cheap things, or you know what is valuable versus what is not, making you a go to person for recommendations or reviews. You could be very good at auditing value. That is technically a career. Not that you have to do that, just know that it is a useful skill. And in stressful situations, you could provide a calm, quiet, and anchoring presence when everybody around you is panicking. Even if you're panicking for some reason, you may not seem like it. And you could also thrive at having consistent devotion and find fulfillment in tending to something, whether it's a garden, a pet, or a collection. And this is something you could thrive in as well. And again, this will depend on which planet is actually your chart ruler. So take a look at the general talents for each ruling planet I have placed on the screen. And so to experiment with those talents, maybe try working on a task at your own pace without letting anybody rush you, and let your nature take the lead to see how it feels to ground yourself in the physical process of doing something. And experiment with the way you pace yourself and find a rhythm of building things that comes naturally so that you can truly tap into what you're good at and you can find a way to apply it. When your chart ruler is in Gemini, your overarching energy is very clever, investigative, deeply curious, and you represent the vital collection and exchange of information. But because astrology is all about potential, your internal talents could often revolve around your mind in some way. You could have a talent, for example, maybe you're the type who can read three different books at the exact same time, making you somebody who can learn incredibly quickly, especially if a topic sparks your passion. And you could also be the person maybe Googling facts in the middle of a conversation to prove a point. Maybe you're very good at research, and that's a skill that not everybody possesses. And so maybe learning how to code or speak a new language or play an instrument just for fun could also come easily to you if that calls to you. And you could also possess a lot of mental flexibility, actually being capable of changing your opinion on a major topic just because you read maybe a well-researched article. So you could just be very competent in general. And when it comes to maybe your social life and the external world, your intelligence and the way you navigate the world through that is going to be sharp. So you could be gifted at bridging networks or people or ideas together that wouldn't naturally blend, using this unique ability to easily open doors for yourself and others as long as you're willing to apply that. And you could also have the ability to make people feel instantly connected to you, perhaps maybe like asking a stranger highly detailed questions about maybe a completely niche subject just to make them feel seen, or you have the ability to do that even if you're an introvert. And when it comes to getting what you want, you could be a good negotiator as long as you practice this muscle. You could have the gift of the gab, almost maybe you're capable of seamlessly talking your way out of a parking ticket, or maybe charming your way into maybe an extension at work if there's like a deadline and you're going to miss it, for example. But keep in mind, this depends on which planet is your chart ruler. So make sure to check out the general talents for each ruling planet on the screen. And so to experiment with these talents, try bridging two completely unrelated pieces of information just for the fun of it. And let your curiosity make the connections and see how it feels to stimulate your mind in a brand new direction. And experiment with the way you process information and find a learning style that comes naturally to you, because this is how you will best tap into your gifts. When your chart ruler is in Cancer, your overarching energy is intuitive, it's empathetic, it's driven by passion, and you derive your intelligence directly from the body. But because astrology is all about potential, your internal talents could often center around emotional depth and somatic or bodily awareness. You could also have a very good memory, which is a trait that honestly doesn't get mentioned enough when it comes to Cancer. Cancer placements have a very good memory, and you may be the type to remember maybe vivid details about past conversations, especially if you're emotionally invested in the piece of information, like it's maybe somebody you care about told you it. But above all, you could have an amazing sense of bodily intelligence, and you could possess the talent of making highly accurate decisions based entirely on gut feeling right in the pit of your stomach, which honestly, a lot of people don't know how to listen to their gut. And so maybe in your relationships and external environments, this could translate into maybe incredible nurturing capabilities. You could have a deep emotional radar, knowing exactly what mood the people in your life are in before they even speak, which could make you an incredible source of emotional support. You could also maybe naturally want to be of service to people you care about, maybe showing up as maybe you're the person, for example, who cooks a meal for your friends simply because you know they had a hard week. But you could also possess maybe a naturally comforting aura in general, making you very safe, reliable, and this could mean that people want to lean on you in any given setting, whether professional, at home, with your friends, in relationships, you name it. And you can know exactly how to create emotionally resonant settings, conversations, or art. This could make you good at like design or good at writing. It could make you good at a lot of things, honestly. And I think the obvious superpower you would have is empathy. And this is not only because you have the ability to maybe make people feel heard, but this trait could also allow you to genuinely understand vastly diverse perspectives, which could help you in so many settings. But remember, the specific flavor of this will depend on which planet is your chart ruler. So reference the planetary talents on the screen just to see how these could blend together. And to experiment with these talents, try relying entirely on your intuition for any random choice that you have to make in the immediate future. And let your bodily intelligence make the call just to see how it feels to honor your emotional responses and to see what that gut feeling almost feels like. And experiment also with the way you protect your energy and find ways to nurture things that come naturally so that you can understand what flavor of talent that you actually have and you can apply it to the real world without burning yourself out. When your chart ruler is in Leo, your overarching energy could be expressive or creative or virtuous. You could be any font of Leo. So keep that in mind when I talk about this section. And so you will radiate light in your own distinct way, even if it's in private or it could be in public. And because astrology is about potential, your internal talents could manifest as an ability to conceptualize and design with your own unique signature. You could have a talent for taking a vague, maybe creative impulse and breaking it down into a sequence of steps that other people can actually understand and build upon. You make information approachable, probably. And you could have the unique ability to maybe put your own creative signature on everyday responsibilities. You could turn a boring status report into something actually not that boring, which could make work feel less like a chore. Furthermore, maybe when others are tempted to cut corners that could compromise a final result. Remember, Leo is virtuous, so you could have the necessary stubbornness to insist on the right way of doing things, ultimately protecting the reputation of whatever you are engaging with. And then in your public life or with group settings, you could be the type to naturally inspire and elevate. And so maybe if a team or a group you're working with hits a wall of fatigue, you could have the natural ability to remind everybody of the why behind the work, keeping the momentum going through pure inspiration, completely bypassing the need to micromanage. You could be very encouraging. And instead of relying on authority or titles or, trying to intimidate people, you could be naturally good at embodying the standards you expect, which could inspire others to rise up and meet you at that level because they genuinely want to contribute to your vision. You could also be the type who can quickly spot when a project, a person, or a piece of work is being undervalued or dismissed, and you could naturally be inclined to stand up for its worth. And ultimately, whether it's a home, an office, a digital space, a friend group, whatever it may be, you could also have a talent for designing settings that feel intentional or personalized, ensuring that everybody who enters feels welcome and important. And this can be used in so many ways. And so, as always, this will be filtered through your specific chart ruler. So be sure to check out the general planetary talents I have put on the screen. And so to experiment with these talents, try injecting your own unique creative signature into one completely mundane task that you got to do that you don't want to do. And so let your inner spark dictate the standard and see how it feels to visibly put your stamp on something. And experiment with the way you express yourself as well. And find a way to put yourself out there, whether you're an introvert or an extrovert. better. And this can help you to, figure out how do you naturally operate? What are your strengths so that you can really tap into your talents and put your unique signature on whatever it is you do. When your chart ruler is in Virgo, your overarching energy could be highly detailed, geared towards analysis. It could value practical, thoughtful application. And because astrology is all about potential, your internal talents could revolve around synthesis and systemic mastery. I know those terms could sound intimidating. Maybe they don't, though. Maybe you're smarter than me. And so I will explain what that means. So you could be gifted at taking large, even messy amounts of information, whether it's research, feedback, data, whatever it could be, and synthesizing it into clear, concise summaries that people can easily follow. You could be the type who is really good at managing information, and you could be very good as well at maybe acting as the ultimate proofreader in your everyday life. You could naturally examine everything, whether it's a document, a workflow, a piece of art, a person, to help ensure there are no missing variables and flaws, and you could be good at, improving things. And if there's a skill that requires focus or steady hands or deep knowledge, like mechanics, coding, or crafting, like sculpting, for example, you could have the ability to have patience as long as you channel in your body to master the technical nuances that everybody else may skip over or get impatient over. And you could also be naturally inclined to build systems that are designed to last. You could create filing systems or, training manuals, instructions, whatever, even tutorials like on YouTube, for example, that could provide long-term stability or even long-term usefulness. In your external environment, your talents could translate into incredible real world usefulness. You could have the ability to understand what people need and provide practical solutions that will actually improve their quality of life, going far beyond just offering a shoulder to cry on. And then you also may not need to reinvent the wheel to be very valuable. You could be highly skilled at taking something already existing and just making it 1% more efficient or cleaner or faster or better, which could end up making all of the difference. And you could also be excellent at resource allocation. You could maybe look at a budget, a pantry, a complex schedule, whatever it may be, and instantly spot where resources are being wasted, and you can help reallocate them for much better usefulness. This is good with like budgeting or finance, for example. But keep in mind how this plays out will depend heavily on the specific ruling planet, which is why I've listed some planetary talents on the screen for you. So to experiment with these talents, try finding one small inefficient process in your day and refine it just to make it 1% better, and let your eyes spot the inefficiencies and see how it feels to actively improve your environment, but also see what are you good at spotting. Not everybody's going to be good at numbers, for example, being a Virgo, but maybe they're good at, helping people feel better about themselves. And then also experiment with the way that you apply your focus and find a systemic approach that comes naturally to you so that you understand where your specific talent can be applied. If your chart ruler is in Libra, like your girl here, your overarching energy could be very balanced, fair. It could deeply understand the world through the lens of others, and you could be the human embodiment of the scale. And because astrology is all about potential, your internal talents could focus heavily on objective design and equilibrium. And you could have a gift for environmental harmony. Maybe you're capable of balancing a space so it just feels right. And so whether you're arranging maybe furniture or designing a slide deck or, a PowerPoint presentation, or you're planning a schedule, you could be the type who can create a flow that feels naturally calming to everybody involved because you will consider all of the variables. And you could also be able to easily detach from your own emotional investment in a disagreement, even if you're an emotional person, which, like, I'm a Leo moon, I'm this way too, but like I can be objective and you can be objective as well. Maybe you're a good referee, and you could be the type who can point out the logic of an opposing argument without feeling like you're betraying your own stance. And so in your relationships or your external communications, you could be the master of mediation. So when two people are maybe arguing or two ideas seem completely incompatible, you could be skilled at finding the subtle alignment point that satisfies everybody. And you could also help to resolve conflicts rather than maybe picking a side. And if there is a side that needs to be picked, trust me, you will do it. And you could have the talent of also maybe adjusting your tone, vocabulary, and body language to ensure your message is truly heard by a specific person you're talking to, making you very good potentially at complex negotiations. And you could also have a keen, almost magnetic awareness of how a room is reacting to information. You could know exactly when to push an idea and when to pull back. And by making people feel deeply heard, you could also act as a bridge that can bring people together for collaborative projects who may have never connected otherwise. And you could be fantastic at reviewing contracts or social promises to ensure that maybe everybody is getting an equal deal, and you want everybody to have that. And so, how this will express will depend on the planet that rules your chart. So, I do have the planetary talents on the screen for you to refer to. And to experiment with these talents, try finding the third option in a situation in your life, maybe today or at least in the immediate future, where there seems to be a frustrating either or choice. And let your sense of balance weigh the scales and see how it actively feels to weigh those scales, because you won't apply those scales to everything. So, you can figure out how that is kind of embodied by you, and also experiment with the way you relate to others and find a way to connect that comes naturally so that you can understand where your true talents can be found. When your chart ruler's in Scorpio, your overarching energy is very investigative, powerful, and deeply focused on deriving control and protection. And because astrology is all about potential, your internal talents could be incredibly powerful. You could be, very good at research, for example, and you could have the deep dive stamina to research a topic or to understand something at such a deep level that you know every single mechanic of what you're, pursuing, whether it's true crime or the occult. It could be psychology, but it doesn't have to be, stereotypically Scorpio things. It could be art or even, like drama, theater, TV, movies, whatever it may be, science, math. And you could also have the rare ability to execute silent transformations. You could be able to work towards a massive goal in total privacy and to keep your power to yourself so that other people don't drain you. And because you may not need external validation to keep going, you could be the type to make changes in your life before anybody else notices what you're doing. And furthermore, you could be able to naturally maximize resources. You could see the hidden potential in maybe what others own or what is available within your environment. You could be very resourceful, and you could know exactly how to utilize any variable to secure your position, which is so useful, trust me. Out in the world, though, you could be the type to handle intensity like no other. You could excel in managing the heavy lifting that maybe others find overwhelming. You could be completely comfortable at looking directly at a complex, strategy, whether it's with taxes or estate planning, crisis management, resolving conflicts, whatever it may be. Where others tend to look away, you won't do that. Within communication, you could be highly skilled at reading the subtext. You could tell immediately, maybe when somebody's words do not match their intentions, which could help you maybe avoid traps in your life as long as you gain that experience and trust yourself. And when a situation becomes intense, you could be able to shift into a state of sharp focus, and you could be the person who could remain cold, calculated, calm, and clear. While everybody else is panicking, you're very resilient. Finally, you could maybe be excellent at establishing boundaries and recognizing when an environment is no longer safe or no longer useful. And you could cut off influences to ensure that whatever you are around, you're secure, everything is working right, and you know how to make the hard decisions to cut out what no longer works. And of course, the exact flavor will depend on the ruling planet. So refer to the planetary talents on the screen to see how they mix. And to experiment with these talents, try working towards a goal in total privacy without telling a single soul your strategy. See what it does to your energy levels. Trust me. Let your investigative focus guide you and see how it feels to leverage that power. And experiment with the way you establish your boundaries and find a way of diving deep that comes naturally so that you understand where exactly that talent of yours could be applied. When your chart ruler's in Sagittarius, I'm lucky, your overarching energy could be very optimistic, expansive, or eager to experience life far beyond your current scope. But because astrology is all about potential, your internal talents could involve visionary, forward thinking growth in some way, or learning or expansion. And you could have a talent for global reframing, maybe taking a localized immediate problem and putting it within a much larger context. And you could have an incredible perspective that can help others realize that their current crisis is actually just a manageable part of a much bigger journey. And your optimism, I just want to say this, it's not empty, it's not useless. It could be a mechanical talent for seeing the potential growth in a difficult situation, and you could help others find the learning lesson in a failure, but you could also help others see the big picture to move projects forward. And you could also be able to synthesize maybe innovative, out of the box ideas by taking two seemingly unrelated fields of study or pieces of information or people and finding the common thread between them, which could help lead to maybe you being very good at making unique solutions that other people would miss. In your external endeavors or your social life, you could be the ultimate explorer as well. You could be skilled at the art of pivoting, maybe while others get stuck in frustration, or maybe like there's a plan that's ruined, for example. You could be the type to quickly identify the new opportunity or the better path hidden right there in the detour. You can see the obvious that other people miss. And you could have a gift for engaging in translation. Maybe you can take complex, dry, or heavy academic topics and make them more relatable or humorous, or make them something that is actually appealing to people. You could also excel at maybe cultural assimilation. You could be capable of entering a completely new environment, like a new job, a new city, a new social group, and quickly understanding the rules and the specific language of the space. And finally, you could be the type who can successfully preserve your potential by refusing to prematurely commit to a path that is too narrow. You could be very flexible, and you could be the type who wants to take in a lot of information before making a decision, which is actually a good thing because you're flexible enough to, move, but you're not so flexible that you don't know your direction as long as you follow the path that makes you passionate. But remember, this will change depending on which planet acts as your chart ruler, so be sure to check the general planetary talents I have on the screen. And so to experiment with these talents, try taking maybe an immediate problem that you have in your life and reframe it through a much larger global perspective, and let your optimism and your big picture thinking help find the growth and to see how it feels to expand that viewpoint, and experiment with the way you explore and find a path of experiencing life that comes naturally, just so you can understand how that talent actually shows up in your life and you can understand how you can channel it for the future. When your chart ruler is in Capricorn, your overarching energy could be highly practical, could be stoic, results oriented. It could be focused on building a solid structure, it could be responsible, reliable. And because astrology is about potential, your internal talents could translate into maybe the ability to be a very good planner or very good at structuring your environment. And you could have a natural understanding of long-term sequencing. And so, what I mean by that is maybe you're not just the type who can look at what needs to be done today. Maybe you could visualize exactly how today's work will directly support the objective you want to hit 2 years from now. You can see cause and effect very, very easily. You could also be gifted at making things durable. You could create structures, whether they are office policies, financial habits, or even something at home or with how to nurture people's emotions. And you could help maybe structure things that are designed to survive and thrive long term rather than just acting as a band-aid. And you could also possess the ultimate BS detector, and you could be capable of looking at something and immediately telling if the resources, the time, and the effort actually match the intended outcome, making you very good at advising potentially. And when it comes to maybe executing work and managing others, you could be the pinnacle of effectiveness. Maybe when presented with a bloated and efficient project, you could be excellent at cutting the fat. You could strip away the non-essentials to reveal the lean, highly functional core of whatever it is that you're doing. You could also have a talent, for example, for professional detachment. You could separate your personal feelings from a task at hand to ensure that whatever it is you're doing is completed to a high standard, even on days when you're not in a good mood. And you could have a talent for sustaining high quality output over very long periods. And you may not be the fastest person, but you could be the one who delivers a final product or a result with absolute structural integrity or strength, whatever it may be. And by showing people exactly what needs to be done in the most efficient way to do it, you could be the type who's very good at leading through clarity, through clearness, and you could foster a deep sense of security with a team or a group of people, even if this isn't something you feel comes naturally to you. And this will obviously depend on which planet rules your chart, which is why I've listed some general planetary talents on the screen for you to review. And to experiment with these talents, try stripping the fat of one bloated task that you have in your life and executing just what is necessary. And let your practical nature sequence the steps to see how it feels to build something durable, to understand how you maybe approach responsibility so that you can better know how to channel it, and also experiment with the way you structure your time and find a way of achieving things that will come naturally to you so that you don't burn out and you can actually be productive. When your chart ruler is in Aquarius, your overarching energy could walk entirely to the beat of its own drum. You could rely on sudden insights and you could view things from an existential outside perspective. But because astrology is all about potential, your internal talents could manifest as visionary, maybe big scale, macro level thinking. And you could have a talent for systems thinking, maybe allowing you to view any situation as part of a larger interconnected web. And you could easily see how a change in one tiny area could cause a ripple effect in another. And this could actually help you identify systemic failures, for example, long before they actually manifest. You could be just very good at understanding systems in general. You could also have an ability to track macro trends over long periods of time, and you can notice how a current event fits perfectly into a 100-year historical cycle. You could be good at pattern recognition, which could allow you to prepare for outcomes that others haven't considered. And this is honestly useful in anything from finance, history, astrology, you name it. And you could also have an ability to apply objective logic to situations, and you can analyze them without getting bogged down into the emotional history of the people involved. And this could help you maybe, for example, to offer solutions based entirely on future-proofed fairness. In the social sphere or in the workplace or externally, you could be very good at innovating. You could be the type who's never afraid to question tradition. And you could be the type to ask, why are we doing it this way? Can we make it better? And this could make you maybe very efficient, for example, at making systems in the workplace or in the public or with groups a lot more better. Maybe you're very good at giving advice from a systemic perspective. And you could also have a talent for bridging the weird. Maybe you're capable of explaining technical or abstract or unconventional concept in a way that makes them totally accessible to the mainstream because you understand how you need to present information. And as an egalitarian leader, you could maybe be the type to treat the CEO and the janitor with the exact same level of respect, which could foster maybe a culture of inclusivity and honesty. You could be very good at seeing people for who they are and not with the rose-colored glasses. And finally, you could possess the courage to maybe test out new methods like technology, maybe software, or just a completely unconventional approach to something. And you could be the type who can discover the next big thing simply because you're willing to try what maybe hasn't been tried before. But your specific brand of innovation or talent could depend on your ruling planet. So take a glance at the planetary talents I've provided on the screen. And so to experiment with these talents, try questioning something outdated and approach it from a completely objective outside perspective, and let your disruptive logic find a new system and see how it feels to actively innovate, even if it's something small in your life. And experiment with the way you view the world and find a way of testing boundaries that come naturally. And by doing all of this, you will figure out kind of like what your brain, your mind, your body is actually good at so that you can apply your talents in whatever direction you want to. And with your chart ruler in Pisces, your overarching energy is a creative sponge that absorbs the world through osmosis and taps deeply into human nature. And because astrology is about potential, your talents could be incredibly fluid, empathetic. They could go very deep, and you could often exhibit maybe precognitive problem solving. You could simply know the answer to a problem, even a logical one, before you have all the facts, because you're able to pick up on subtle energy shifts that maybe others can't perceive easily. You could also be the type to learn through osmosis, picking up the unspoken rules of a new topic or a group, no matter what area of life that is, just by being present. And being an osmotic learner is honestly such a gift because this can help you like maybe even process a lot of information without getting overwhelmed. And you could also have a talent for mastering the gray area, comfortably understanding maybe the complexity and the contradictions of human nature, which could help you empathize with others in a way that not everybody can. In your external expressions and relationships, you are the alchemist of emotion, and you could be capable of ultimate adaptability. And you could almost move like water with this placement. You could have such a huge capacity to shape yourself to fit into whatever role, like a job, maybe a social circle, or whatever system you're a part of. You could fit into what role is required of you at the time. And you could also be gifted at inspirational weaving. You could pull inspiration from everything, a passing conversation, a dream, a song, and you could tie it all together into a cohesive new idea or a project that feels deeply resonant and that rings with others on a big level, whether it's art or design, whatever it may be. You could also excel, for example, at maybe energy translation. You could absorb heavy, chaotic energies. You could process them and then translate them into something tangible. And this could be something creative like art or music, or it could even be something social like a comforting interaction. It could be a dance. It could be a workout. You could even translate it into something like hard work or grit, depending on obviously what planet is involved, what house is involved. It's a very nuanced placement. But armed with this deep understanding of human nature, you could also be the type who's very good at offering non-judgmental guidance. You could help people navigate their own internal conflicts when their words don't match their actions, and you can be a very understanding person who can see things from all perspectives. But to see how this specifically shapes up for you, look at the planet that rules your chart, and I've placed those general planetary talents right on the screen for you. And to experiment with these talents, try sitting in a gray area of a complex situation instead of forcing a black and white answer. And let your intuitive sponge absorb the subtle data and see how it feels to synthesize that energy. What do you want to channel that towards? Because that could be a hint as to maybe what you're naturally good at. And experiment with the way you adapt to your environment and find a way of processing the world that comes naturally so that you don't burn out, but you can use your energy for good. When your chart ruler is in the first house, your core energy could revolve around your personal agency, your physical body, and you could have an ability to move through the world on your own terms. But because astrology is all about potential, your internal decision making could be highly self directed. And you could operate best when you act as the primary catalyst, meaning you don't typically need a middleman or a sounding board to process information or to, navigate the world. And so, out in the world, your physical presence and identity are your primary tools. And so, you could have a talent for, initiating movement or getting a project off the ground simply by taking the first step yourself. And whether you are leading a meeting or starting a new routine, you could project a specific self reliance that can draw interest from other people to your ideas. It's like there's something about your aura that could pull people in. And you could find that you thrive in independent endeavors because your own personal effort and physical embodiment of a task carry enough weight to validate your projects, completely bypassing the need to wait for a committee to agree with you. And so, to experiment with these talents, try stepping into a room and taking action on a task without asking for a single second opinion. And let your skills or your physical presence and personal agency steer the ship, finding a way to process your environment that can help you tap in to your greatest gifts. When your chart ruler is in the second house, your core energy revolves around resourcefulness, self esteem, and managing tangible value. But because astrology is all about potential, your internal focus could center around recognizing what is actually useful in the real world. And you could possess an intuitive eye for valuation, whether that involves like assessing a budget or the durability of a piece of equipment or your own personal agency or your own personal energy. You could spot material potential where others can't, maybe. And you could also be highly adept at grounding your thoughts by engaging directly with the physical world, and you can naturally assess what you literally own to kind of solve abstract problems. You could be very resourceful. In your interactions and out in the world, your ability to manage resources could be a massive advantage. So you could have a talent for leveraging what you already have, easily turning basic supplies or existing skills or limited funds into something highly valuable. And you could act as a stabilizing force for others, utilizing your firm grasp on tangible reality to provide practical step-by-step solutions. And when it comes to your daily life, you can naturally know exactly what your time and labor are worth, helping you set firm boundaries to protect your personal resources so you never give your energy away for free. And so to experiment with these talents, try physically organizing a tangible resource you have, like cleaning out your wallet or balancing out your closet, or even like, fixing your budget. And let your natural resourcefulness take the lead, finding a way to process your environment that can help you tap into your greatest gifts. When your chart ruler is in the third house, your core energy revolves around your immediate environment, your mindset, and the daily exchange of information. But because astrology is all about potential, your internal processing could involve constantly managing the logistics right in front of you. And so you could excel at digesting and sorting through data. And this could allow you to learn the mechanics of your immediate surroundings. You could learn new skills very quickly, like software or writing, whatever it may be. And you could naturally ask how the systems around you operate, easily uncovering maybe practical information or efficiency loopholes that others would walk right past simply because they aren't paying attention. And externally, you could act as a conductor of, organization around your immediate environment. So you could be highly skilled at managing your immediate environment. You could be good at running errands, which, you could be efficient at the very least. Or you could be good at juggling the moving parts of a complex schedule without dropping the ball. And then when you're communicating, you could have a talent for translating immediate information, and you could serve as the necessary bridge between people or maybe like coworkers who need to understand each other to get a job done. This can make you a good leader. And you could also act as a very good networker if you apply yourself to that. And you could facilitate the exchange of ideas within your immediate surroundings to keep everything running smoothly. But to experiment with these talents, I would try striking up a casual conversation with somebody in your immediate vicinity. It could be a friend, a neighbor, it could even be a spouse, a family member, or try writing down your immediate unfiltered thoughts. But let yourself kind of focus on your mindset and pay attention to how the gears in your mind work, because that can help you find out how you can tap into your greatest gifts. When your chart ruler is in the fourth house, your core energy revolves around foundational roots, your innermost self, and acting as an anchor. But because astrology is all about potential, your internal processing could naturally excel at root cause analysis. So you could possess a unique ability to look past surface level symptoms to understand the foundational history or the lineage of a problem. And you could know exactly where an issue originated very easily. And you could have a deep talent for establishing a highly secure base of operations, no matter if you're at home or at your work or with friends. And you could recognize that no project or person or system can grow without those, solid roots to back it up. And externally, your ability to provide structural and psychological stability is a massive asset, because you could have a distinct talent for anchoring a team or a situation, and you could serve as a reliable grounding force when the external circumstances of life become chaotic. And you could be skilled at creating psychological safety, and you could intuitively know how to build an environment, whether that's, a workspace, a team, or a personal boundary where people feel secure enough to operate authentically. Furthermore, you could excel at foundational development. You could be able to take raw concepts and expertly lay the groundwork down so that whatever is built on top of it will actually endure. And so to experiment with these talents, try identifying the absolute root cause of a reoccurring issue in your life rather than just managing the symptoms, or focus on solidifying the foundational steps of a new project and let your natural ability to act as an anchor lead the way, because this will help you find a way to process your environment so that you can tap into your greatest gifts. When your chart ruler is in the fifth house, your core energy revolves around creativity, pleasure, and building things simply for the joy of it. It is the house of creation. And because astrology is about potential, your internal mindset could be sparked by the distinct thrill of generating something new. And creation here isn't limited to art or performance. You could be designing a spreadsheet, launching a small business. You could be growing a garden, building a piece of furniture. You could learn and process the world best, no matter what, when you are actively putting something new into the world. And that new thing, as I stated, it literally could be anything. And you could have a knack for turning a boring task into a game. And this could boost your productivity by making your routine feel rewarding rather than like a chore. And externally, you could easily draw people in through your willingness to take creative risks. You could have a talent for maybe putting your personal stamp on a project or drawing interest to your ideas simply by leaning into what makes you feel genuinely excited. And you could intuitively know how to engage with others through play. And you could capture the attention of others by freely sharing the things you are passionate about. And you could be skilled at taking calculated risks to express yourself. The riskier, the better, honestly. So you could also spot exciting opportunities to build a concept that others could view as far too daring because of this. And so to experiment with your talents, try one unproductive, purely fun hobby today just for the joy of it, or maybe try to take a huge risk when it comes to your creative endeavors and let your drive to create lead the way so that you can find a way to process your environment that can help you tap into your greatest gifts. When your chart ruler is in the sixth house, your core energy revolves around day to day maintenance, routine, and managing the mundane. And because astrology is all about potential, your internal talents could manifest as highly practical applications of troubleshooting. So you could be highly skilled at managing your daily habits, recognizing that how you treat your body, like with sleep or diet or posture, will directly impact your daily cognitive output. And you could also possess a sharp eye for maintenance and easily identify logistical flaws, mechanical snags, or where something is inefficient in complex projects. And you could be the person who knows how to fix it, or the person who helps identify the problem so that other people can fix it. But in your daily life, you could also be an engine that just keeps things functioning. You could have a talent for walking into unmanaged situations and immediately identify the practical steps needed to organize it. And you could stabilize your environment through that. And you could also have a gift for managing day to day responsibilities, and you could handle the invisible mundane work that keeps a household or a business or a project like art running smoothly without ever demanding for attention for it. And you could also be great at optimizing your daily schedule or other people's schedules. You could be good at organizing and optimizing things in general. And you could serve your environment by providing highly practical, useful solutions to everyday problems. And so to experiment with these talents, try optimizing just one small daily habit, like how you manage your inbox or how you prep your meals or how you organize your desk, and let your focus on maintenance spot the inefficiency, and so that you can find a way to process your environment in a way that can truly help you to tap in to your greatest gifts. When your chart ruler is in the seventh house, your core energy revolves around one on one relating, partnerships, and the world through the mirror of other people. And because astrology is about potential, your internal talents could center around the self awareness you gain through direct feedback, and you could possess an ability to identify your own blind spots simply by observing how you react to other people's behavior. And you could use your one on one relationships as a highly effective feedback loop for personal growth. But you could also process complex information best when you have a dedicated sounding board, and you could utilize the back and forth exchange of dialogue to solidify your own thoughts. But if we're talking externally, you could have the ability to navigate interpersonal dynamics very strongly, and you could have a talent for forming strategic alliances, introducing people, concepts, or ideas that maybe end up creating perfectly beneficial partnerships. You could also be highly skilled at one on one negotiation, like managing deals or contracts or agreements, where your primary goal is to ensure both sides are actively heard or accounted for. And furthermore, you could just have a real gift for bridging the gap between yourself and other people, whether it's an opponent or you want to be a therapist. And you could utilize your deep understanding of human dynamics to navigate the exchange of you versus the other without unnecessary conflict. And if anything, you could probably help them. And so to experiment with these talents, try asking somebody you trust for their objective perspective on a problem you are facing today, and let your focus on partnership receive the feedback so that you can maybe find a way to better understand how you relate to people, and this could help you tap into your greatest gifts. When your chart ruler is in the eighth house, your core energy could revolve around shared resources, transformation, and navigating the parts of life you cannot easily control. But because astrology is all about potential, your internal processing could naturally focus on deep, unbroken investigation, and you could be comfortable exploring the heavier hidden parts of a situation, and you could have a root level understanding of what actually makes a system or a person tick or what makes them run. You could be very good at uncovering hidden motivations, and you could also possess incredible resilience, having the ability to go through a massive shift or an uncontrollable life event and emerge on the other side completely transformed and highly capable. In your relationships or your external endeavors, you could be highly equipped to handle the things that are complex. And so you could have a highly strategic mind for managing things like merged assets, taxes, debts, shared investments, energies. You could be very good at, helping others heal. And you could also be good at things when intense precision is required to navigate things that aren't, very straightforward. And you could also be known as the ultimate keeper of secrets. And maybe when you do draw people in, you draw them in very, very deeply because they could feel like they can confide in you. Maybe you are somebody who can discuss heavy, intimate topics and they feel like they can trust you and that they can be vulnerable around you. But also, you could have a knack for seeing exactly how to tear a failing project down and then rebuild it into something powerful. So keep that in mind if you've ever had a dream. And so, to experiment with these talents, try exploring a deep, investigative topic or reviewing a complex, deal in your life today. This could be a joint budget, a debt, a collaborative project, a psychological, inner working in your mind, and let your focus on transformation sort of take the center stage, because when you can do that, you can figure out how you navigate these parts of life, which can help you tap in to your greatest gifts. When your chart ruler is in the ninth house, your core energy could revolve around higher learning, expansion, and exploring far beyond your current scope. But because astrology is about potential, your internal mindset could constantly seek out a larger framework or to seek the meaning of life. And so you could have a natural drive to encounter unfamiliar philosophies. You could be, somebody who is into academic studying, whether it's, formal or informal, maybe foreign cultures appeals to you. And you could be the type of person who simply wants to explore for the sake of widening your worldview and challenging your own assumptions. And you could also have the necessary courage to question your beliefs, especially if you were raised with ones that, maybe do call for questioning, which allows you to build a personal, moral, or intellectual framework that expands your understanding of the world. Externally, you could be the type who's good at acting as a visionary or a guide. And so you could have a talent for big picture thinking, and you can act as the person that other people go to when they need to step back from, maybe the data to see the big picture. Maybe people trust you with advice. And you could be very good at debate as well. You could be the type who can argue a philosophical or an ethical topic with deep conviction, making you a highly effective advocate as well for ideas and causes you find meaningful. And finally, you could be very good at explaining highly complex global concepts to your peers or maybe to a classroom. You could be a good teacher, a professor as well, and you could serve as a reliable bridge to higher learning for other people. And so, if you do want to experiment with these talents, try reading an article or watching a documentary about a framework or a culture or a concept that is kind of like out of your scope, and let your drive for higher learning kind of synthesize the meaning. Pay attention to how you process the information, because that can help you understand how this placement works for you, and it can help you eventually tap into your greatest gifts. When your chart ruler is in the 10th house, your core energy could revolve around leadership, ambition, and managing your public role in some way. But because astrology is about potential, your internal talents could be centered heavily around how you take charge and build a reputation or, kind of a name for yourself that is reliable or that achieves something or that goes after what they want. And you could feel a deep internal drive to leave your work environment better and more structured than you found it, or to maybe, leave your impact as like something that is very responsibly managed. And you could focus heavily on your long-term trajectory and focus on, the long-term goals rather than getting distracted by the short term. And you could have a talent for setting an overarching goal and kind of acting as the executive of your own life. And you're a very responsible person as well. You will take responsibility, and that is as a goal or a talent. And in the public eye and your professional world, you could naturally be the type who steps into leadership. And there's something about your aura that could project reliability in situations where maybe, there needs to be a leader. And people could intuitively look up to you for clear direction. And you could also find that others naturally defer to your judgment in crisis, whether professional or not, simply because you project this quiet, capable aura that commands respect. And you could also be highly skilled at logistical oversight and take charge of, major endeavors and actively lead the resources required to maybe get a public project or a goal across the finish line. If you do want to experiment with your talents, try taking absolute ownership of a project or a problem in your life without asking for permission or waiting for guidance, and let yourself be ambitious and pay attention to how you want to lead or how you want to take responsibility, because this can help you find a way to process your environment that can really help you tap into your greatest gifts. When your chart ruler is in the 11th house, your core energy could revolve around the larger web of society, community goals, and your place among the collective. But because astrology is all about potential, your internal talents could heavily involve looking at the network or being a part of the network and seeing like the big picture of society rather than maybe solely focusing on the individual. So you could be highly skilled at stepping back from personal drama to view a situation through the lens of what, the big picture is, or through the lens of the group or the cause or through society, really allowing you to resolve conflicts like community conflicts or, even societal causes with cool objective logic. And you could also be very good at looking at a massive societal or organizational problem and finding a solution that connects disparate people or causes towards a shared objective. In your social circles or your community, if you are connected to those, you could be the ultimate orchestrator almost of the larger web if you put your mind to it, even if you're an introvert. And so you could possess a talent for treating everybody as an equal. And you can people can sense that, they can sense when you see them as a genuine equal, which could help you foster maybe genuine inclusivity and collaboration in any group or setting or cause you participate in, regardless of the title or the status. And you could have a true gift for organizing people towards a shared goal, whether it's facilitating an event or coordinating a local group or making a website, or even just rallying your friends for a collective project. And you could also excel at maybe social connection. You could be the type who can identify the larger trends in your community or in society and stand up for the goals you deeply believe in. And this could actually make a change depending on how you channel this. And so to experiment with these talents, try approaching a group problem or a societal problem strictly from the perspective of what serves the big picture or the larger web rather than your personal preference, and let your focus on the collective view the logistics. Pay attention to how your mind works when you are in these settings, because this will help you find a way to process your environment that can help you actually tap into the nature of what your greatest gifts look like. When your chart ruler is in the 12th house, your core energy revolves around the subconscious, the unseen, and working effectively in isolation. But because astrology is all about potential, your internal talents could feel deeply intuitive and focused on what is transcending, the earthly plane in some way. So you could have a strong awareness of your own need for solitude, and you could be the type who can use isolation to recharge your spirit and process the heavy noise of the world. Maybe you can process the unseen dynamics of the world better than other people. And because you have a deep talent for interpreting the unseen and finding a deep meaning in your subconscious patterns or spiritual practices, you could use this as a highly valuable tool for navigating your daily life and for, creating something that truly considers that unseen energy, which could actually resonate with a lot of people because you could be tapped into that collective energy. Externally, you could interact with the world through a highly perceptive and empathetic lens. You could operate effectively, maybe behind the scenes. You could perform a lot of work, especially if the nature of the work maybe puts you behind the public spotlight. You're very good at working behind the scenes, and you could derive satisfaction from the task itself. And you could also have a talent for picking up on the unseen mechanics of a room, which allows you to understand the hidden, often painful root motivations, maybe behind someone's behavior that could could be good for therapy or counseling. And ultimately, you could also thrive in creative or spiritual solitude. And your best ideas and most resonant work could emerge the most clearly when you are alone and free from distraction. And whatever you create could have, an impact on the greater world because of that. And so to experiment with these talents, try spending an hour completely alone in silence, maybe without a phone or background noise or distractions, and focus on your subconscious, focus on the unseen, and tap into, the inner workings of your mind so that you understand how it works, how it naturally is directed, which can help you process your environment in ways that can truly help you understand what the nature of your greatest gifts are. With Aries on the cusp of your third house, depending on the placement of its ruler Mars, your cognitive and manual talents could be fueled by a fast, go getting, and pioneering edge to how you process the world. Your communication style could manifest as direct, articulate, or highly persuasive, and you could excel in public speaking, debating, or any verbal expression that requires courage and quick thinking. Intellectually, you could possess a quick comprehension. You could be able to absorb information on the fly and immediately apply it to real world scenarios. Your manual dexterity could lean towards speed, precision under pressure, and an intuitive mechanical skill to handle maybe tools or instruments that require, physical use. In your daily life, your self initiative could be unmatched, so you could be a natural self starter who navigates your local environment with efficiency. You could be constantly pushing yourself to learn new active hobbies without needing anybody to hold your hand as well. You could be very good at self learning. But looking at the ruler of your third house by sign and house, which is your Mars placement, will provide more insight into how this can look for you specifically. With Taurus on the cusp of your third house, depending on the placement of its ruler, which is Venus, your cognitive and manual talents could be guided by a deliberate, aesthetic, and highly practical approach to your immediate environment. Something about your communication could be grounded, soothing, and methodical, and you could excel in copywriting or vocal performance, or delivering information that builds trust and stability. Intellectually, you could learn best through tangible application. You could possess the patience to study and absorb everyday knowledge until you achieve mastery. Your fine motor skills as well could be exceptional when applied to, very tangible crafts or outlets, such as sculpting, gardening, woodworking, playing an instrument, but it's not limited to those, by the way. And in your daily life, your effort could be characterized by a steady, enduring routine. And so you can navigate your world as a reliable, stabilizing force. And you could have the ability to turn abstract ideas into well crafted physical realities. But obviously, look at the ruling planet, which is your Venus, of your third house, and look at your Venus placement by sign and house, because this will provide more insight into how this will look for you specifically. With Gemini on the cusp of your third house, depending on the placement of its ruler, which is Mercury, you are operating with this house's natural energy, which could make cognitive and manual agility a superpower for you. And so your communication could be quick fire. You could be very witty or funny. You could have an incredibly versatile way of communicating. You could be naturally gifted at writing or journalism, learning languages, or bridging the gap between diverse groups of people or diverse ideas. And your intellect could be marked by a nimble, sort of analytical curiosity that allows you to multitask or to cross pollinate ideas and to process a lot of data, in a very quick amount of time. But also, your hand eye coordination could be, very highly capable in some way. You could be very good with hand-eye coordination, potentially making you maybe good at typing or coding or playing piano or any craft that requires, complex, quick finger work or, using your hands in very complex ways. And in your daily life, your adaptability could be off the charts. So you could be able to handle a busy commute, a bustling neighborhood, and a constantly fluctuating schedule a little bit easier than some other people. But obviously, looking at the ruler of your third house, which is your Mercury, by sign and house, will provide a lot more insight into how this can look for you specifically. With Cancer on the cusp of the third house, depending on the placement of your moon, which is the ruler of Cancer, your cognitive and manual talents could be governed by deep empathy, making your communication style emotionally resonant and intuitively driven. Your verbal expression and writing could carry, a poetic, nostalgic, or emotionally resonant weight, allowing you to connect with your audience or your peers or whoever you are communicating to on a deep, comforting level. Intellectually, you could also absorb information through feeling or memory, potentially maybe even possessing an uncanny ability to read the unspoken subtext of your local environment. Cancer placements or Cancer in the third house, very good at memory, by the way. But also, there's something about your manual dexterity that could be expressed through acts of care. So you could be good at, acts of care, like cooking or making a present for somebody by hand, or utilizing tools to build safe, intimate spaces or products, whatever it may be. And in your daily life, your self-initiative could be activated when caring for something, whether it's your community, a project, a plant, whatever it may be. And you can navigate your daily routines by instinctively responding to emotional tides of the people around you. And this is a good talent to have. But looking at the ruler of your third house, which is your moon, by sign and house, will provide more insight into how this can look for you specifically. When Leo is on the cusp of your third house, depending on the placement of its ruler, which is the sun, your cognitive and manual talents could be illuminated by, a sense of authenticity, warmth. You could be very creative in how you express yourself. And your communication could be engaging, charismatic, and in some cases, depending on the sign, it could be theatrical, and you could excel in storytelling, creative writing, maybe even public speaking, where you have to captivate and inspire your audience in some way. Intellectually, you could learn best through play, through doing. Sometimes, in some cases, you could learn best through performance, but also you could be good in taking pride in your mental output. So if you are really proud of an idea, if you're really confident, you will be a lot smarter in some way, which is actually a really interesting dynamic. But you could also become a central networking hub for your local community because you could draw people in like a magnet if you are confident in yourself. And your fine motor skills could shine in maybe things where you have to express a loud outcome. You could be good at jewelry making. You could be good at set design. You could be good at painting, but also anything where you have to like really stand out and make something around that. You could be good at that. And in your daily life, you could approach your routines with a sense of self-initiative and a sense of authenticity. And this could help you maybe step into leadership roles. Even if this isn't something that calls to you, you could be a good leader if you put your mind to it. But looking at the ruler of your third house, which is your sun, by sign and house, will definitely provide more insight into how this can look for you specifically. When Virgo is on the cusp of your third house, depending on the placement of its ruler, which is Mercury, your cognitive and manual talents could be fine-tuned to be very precise. You could be good at critical analysis, and you could be a logistical genius in some way in your everyday life. Something about your communication could be clear, articulate. You could be good at editing. You could be good at technical writing or reporting or conveying complex ideas with accuracy. Intellectually, your capacity for research and studying could be big. You could be the master at organizing data and spotting the details that everybody else misses. Your manual dexterity could be also very good. You could be very good at intricate crafts, like watchmaking, for example, or drafting or coding or fixing something very complex. And in your daily life, your adaptability could be expressed through optimization. You could be the type to troubleshoot local issues and continuously improve your own daily routines. But looking at the ruler of your third house, which is your Mercury by sign and house, will provide a lot more insight into how this can look for you specifically. When Libra is on the cusp of your third house, depending on the placement of its ruler, which is Venus, your cognitive and manual talents could be harmonized by a diplomatic or charming or a highly balanced approach to your thoughts, your environment in some way. And your communication could be very tactful, balanced. It could be persuasive, and you could excel in mediation, public relations, collaborative writing, and speaking in ways that unites opposing viewpoints. Intellectually, you could comprehend information best through dialogue, working things out by talking to another person or weighing the scales. And you could potentially possess a natural networking ability that makes you kind of, able to connect with people very easily. And that could be a talent as well. And your fine motor skills could be geared towards creating symmetry and beauty. You could be good at fashion design, illustration, makeup, arranging physical objects perfectly, whatever it may be. And in your daily life, your effort could be focused on maintaining equilibrium. You could be able to seamlessly navigate your immediate environment and daily tasks with grace and social ease because you know how to balance those scales. But obviously, you want to look at your Venus placement by sign and house because this will provide more insight into how this can look for you specifically. With Scorpio on the cusp of your third house, depending on the placement of its rulers, which is Mars and Pluto, although we will be looking more at Mars because it is a personal placement, your cognitive and manual talents could be driven by an intense focus. You could be good at investigating, and you could have a psychological depth in the way you communicate. And your verbal expression in some way could be very probing, strategic. It could be very impactful. You could have a powerful voice. You could excel in something like investigative journalism, research, and writing that uncovers hidden truths or talks about something that may be a little bit taboo. Intellectually, your comprehension could be very sharp. You could have the potential not to just learn things on a surface level, but to obsessively deconstruct information until you understand its absolute core. If anybody's going to get to the root of an issue, it's you. And your manual dexterity could be characterized by a sense of precision and a talent for transforming or recycling old materials into maybe powerful new tools. And in your daily life, your self initiative could be fueled by a resilient, unyielding drive. You could be the type who can navigate your local environment with keen observation. You could always be the type who can read the subtle, unseen dynamics of your immediate environment. But obviously, look at your Mars placement by sign and house because this will provide more insight into how this could look for you specifically. With Sagittarius on the cusp of your third house, depending on the placement of your Jupiter, which is the ruler of the third house, your cognitive and manual talents could be, kind of defined by enthusiasm. You could be a very good philosophical thinker, and you could have an ability to have a broad vision in your everyday life. There's something about your communication as well that could be blunt or honest, but you could also be very highly inspirational. And so you could excel in broad concept writing. You could be good at broadcasting, podcasts, and you could potentially have a deep aptitude for learning. And in some cases, you could be good at speaking foreign languages. And intellectually, you could comprehend the big picture instantly, and you could be driven by a natural, restless curiosity to study diverse subjects and to kind of cross pollinate global ideas within your local community. And your fine motor skills could often be expressed through, expansive sweeping movements. Like you could excel, for example, in outdoor crafts. You could be good at anything that uses a large tool, which seems kind of weird, but it's very Jupiterian. You could be good at something that's, a dynamic physical hobby like dance. And in your everyday life, your adaptability could be very, great. It could be a talent. You could treat your daily commute or your neighborhood or your immediate environment as an exciting adventure, which constantly pushes you to, understand that life is this like big grand mission. And this could help you constantly push your boundaries and to really push yourself and to push your mental limits. And this could help you to make a big impact with how you communicate and in your immediate environment. But looking at your Jupiter by sign and house will definitely provide more insight into how this could look for you specifically. With Capricorn on the cusp of your third house, depending on the placement of its ruler, which is Saturn, your cognitive and manual talents could be structured by, how you take discipline. You could have a sense of authority, and you could have a practical focus when it comes to your mental output. And something about your communication could be concise or authoritative. You could be very deeply objective, and you could excel in things like copywriting, research, and speaking in a setting where you need to command command respect. And intellectually, your learning style could be very systemic, and you could, know how to structure learning in a very talented way. And you could build your knowledge kind of utilizing brilliant long-term analytical thinking and, building one brick at a time when it comes to your knowledge base. And your technical and mechanical skills could be exceptional when, applied to whatever it is that you want to build. So if you want to do something with your hands, you could excel in architecture, drafting, masonry, or assembling highly complex art or structures. And in your daily life, your effort could be driven by self-initiative and how you take ownership of what you do. And you could be the type to organize your immediate environment kind of with this executive level efficiency, as long as you are willing to put in the work to do so. But looking at the placement of your Saturn by sign and house will provide more insight into how this could look for you specifically. When Aquarius is on the cusp of your third house, depending on the placement of your Saturn, which is the traditional ruler, Uranus also rules Aquarius. We will not be going into that just because it's not a personal planet. Your cognitive and manual talents could be almost electrified by highly original, inventive, and objective thinking when it comes to how you approach your thoughts and your daily life. And your communication could be unconventional in some way. It could be brilliant. It could be future oriented. And you could excel in maybe writing about systems or social ideals and networking with maybe diverse groups of people. Intellectually as well, there's something about your comprehension that could be very fast. You could be able to, take ideas and see them from a new perspective. And this could allow you to process highly complex or scientific or even astrological information with a sense that can see the big picture and the details at the same time. And something about your manual dexterity, which is how you use your hands, could be geared towards maybe the cutting edge. So you could intuitively understand how to assemble or fix something that requires a system like robots or technology, whatever it may be. But you could also be good at digital art tools like graphic design, or just maybe you could have an unusual way of doing anything that works with your hands, like art. And in your daily life, your adaptability could be based on your ability to innovate, and you could constantly find brilliant or unexpected workarounds to navigate your world. But looking at the ruler of your third house, which traditionally is Saturn, by sign and house will provide more insights into how this can look for you specifically. And then when Pisces is on the cusp of your third house, depending on the placement of its rulers, which is Neptune and Jupiter, although we will focus on Jupiter more because it is a personal planet, whereas Neptune is generational, your cognitive and manual talents could be dissolved and expanded by a deeply poetic or imaginative or intuitive lens when it comes to how you process the world. Your communication could rely heavily on symbols or imagery and deep empathy. And so you could excel in creative writing or poetry or conveying concepts that transcend logical language. And you could even be good at something that is logical, but you're able to make it more approachable by, kind of taking out the details that could confuse people, I guess. And intellectually, you could comprehend information almost through osmosis. And so you could absorb the energy of your environment and learn through visual media or spiritual curiosity. And you could learn through, absorbing the information rather than just, strictly memorizing it. And there's something about your fine motor skills that could be fluid. You could be very good at painting or photography, maybe playing an instrument, or utilizing tools with a delicate, kind of like fluid motion. And in your daily life, your adaptability could be your greatest strength. So you can navigate your world by kind of flowing through obstacles like water almost. And you could be very good when you are guided by your intuition. But obviously, looking at your Jupiter placement by sign and house will provide a lot more insight into how this could look for you specifically. When the ruler of your third house is in Aries, your mind and hands could work very fast, and you could be the type who doesn't need to wait for instructions to learn something. You may learn better by doing. And because astrology is about potential, your internal learning style could be very hands-on, it could be very reactive, and you could be able to learn to maybe, for example, use new tools or software by touching them and experimenting rather than needing to read the manual first. And when it comes to the physical world, you could excel at fixing issues by trial and error. You could be the type to fix physical or mental mechanisms through action to ensure that things work properly. And you could also possess reactive skills. You could be the type to execute physical tasks that require, fast reflexes, such as maybe catching falling objects or navigating unpredictable spaces. And even your sense of direction could be very instinctual. You could be the type who could find your way through a new city by trusting your intuitive navigation and gut directions in the moment, rather than, relying on constant mapping. And in your local environment and daily communications, you could be a direct initiator and you could have a talent for quick communication. You could be the type to draft and send emails quickly without overthinking the wording to get your point across efficiently. And when sharing ideas, you could be skilled at impromptu pitching, communicating with confidence on the spot without needing a script or, without needing like prepared notes. And you could also find it easy to initiate discourse. You could be the type who can speak up first to break the ice and to get a meeting or conversation started. And this forward momentum means that you could have a talent for direct conversation, initiating difficult tasks early so that you can address issues immediately rather than waiting in anxiety. But obviously, this will depend on which planet rules your third house, which is why I have some general talents for each ruling planet on the screen. And so, to experiment with these talents, try completing a manual task like assembling something small or fixing, something in your house without looking at the instructions, and try to rely on your instinct. But also, try to experiment with the way you move and find a pace for communicating that comes naturally so that you understand the direction that your talents can be applied to. When the ruler of your third house is in Taurus, your mind and hands could operate on methodical pacing and materialization. So you could excel at grounding abstract concepts and building things to last. And because astrology is about potential, your internal processing could be rooted and geared towards sustainability. You could have a mind that prefers to layer information slowly to ensure it sets permanently, allowing you to absorb dense materials without skipping details. You could also thrive when maybe working with physical objects. You could be the type to understand the mechanics of how materials such as clay or wood or metal behave when manipulated, but obviously this will depend on what interests you. And you could also possess steady hands. You could be the type who can maintain a reliable grip when handling tools or machinery, which allows you to work with exact precision. Furthermore, you could have a talent for following instructions sequentially, executing a process one step at a time to ensure the final product is structurally sound. And the steady focus could grant you the ability to tune out distractions, giving you a memory where your recall is very, very good. You could recall factual data many years later. And then in your communications and local interactions, your energy could ground the room and you could speak at a very deliberate pace, use a calm cadence that forces others to slow down, allowing the exchange of information to actually be digested. And because you process the world through a lens of tangible reality, you could be excellent at delivering advice, especially practical advice. And you could be able to look at a chaotic situation and point out the facts and help others ground their ideas into actionable steps. But obviously, this will depend on which planet rules your third house, which is why I have some general talents for each ruling planet on the screen. So to experiment with these talents, try working with a physical material today, or you can focus on putting something together step by step. And let your endurance really take the lead to see how it feels to actually build something tangible, but also experiment with the pace of your mind so that you understand the direction that your talents can be applied to. When the ruler of your third house is in Gemini, your mind and hands could operate on the mechanic of cross-pollination and investigation, so you could excel at gathering different data points and bridging the gap between them. But because astrology is all about potential, your internal mindset may be clever or multi-directional. You could have the capacity for processing different streams of information all at once. You could be, skilled at texting someone while simultaneously, watching a YouTube video while you're in class and somehow you can, absorb everything. And you could possess very coordinated hands. You could display mechanical speed when typing, maybe operating instruments or assembling parts of a machine, or, you're building like a drawer, for example, and you can do that very easily. But you could also be capable of learning through curious observation and pick up the mechanics of a new task simply by watching how the moving parts operate. And when navigating your day, you could excel at logistical efficiency. You could be the type who could juggle minor tasks by instinctively finding the quickest route to exchange information or drop things off or to complete everything. And in your conversations and local environment, you could act as a conduit. And so, in other words, you could have a talent for keeping the exchange of information moving, pivoting between unrelated topics without losing your train of thought. You could be skilled at investigative engagement. You could possess a gift for asking the follow-up questions that cracks a topic open and gathers deeper insights. And because your mind categorizes data quickly, you could excel at translating ideas, bridging the gap between two people or ideas who fail to understand or relate to each other by kind of, rephrasing or reframing the mechanics of the issue so it makes sense in some way. But obviously, this will depend on which planet is your third house ruler, which is why I have some general talents for each ruling planet on the screen. So, to experiment with these talents, try exposing yourself to two different pieces of media maybe at the same time, like listening to a podcast while reading an article, and see how easily your brain connects the concepts. And experiment as well with the way you absorb information and find a rhythm of doing that comes naturally to you so that you can understand the true direction that your talents can be applied to. When the ruler of your third house is in Cancer, your mind and hands operate on retention and bodily intelligence. So you could excel at preserving information and deriving data from your physical and emotional responses. But because astrology is all about potential, your internal world could process information by anchoring it to a specific sense of internal resonance. And so you could have a very reliable memory. You could be able to recall the phrasing of a conversation or the layout of a space years later because your mind could almost encode that data in your body, and that can have a lasting impact. And that's obviously very useful. But also, you could have a talent for, preserving information. You could be the type who can catalog data or historical records or conversations, almost driven by a mechanical need to keep information secure. But you could also possess a feel for your environment and derive intelligence directly from your body to know how hard to press when maybe using physical objects by sensing the resistance in your hands. And this translates into creating by feeling. So you could build something very easily. You could be able to cook or craft by trusting your internal sense of almost what is required rather than following rigid measurements. You could be very good at learning things hands on, in other words. In your local environment, you could navigate and communicate by reading the atmosphere. You could find yourself moving through your neighborhood, for example, based on landmarks that hold a sense of familiarity or safety rather than having to follow a map. And then when communicating, you could have a talent for reading the unspoken space. You could absorb the underlying tone of an email or a text before you finish reading it. And you can identify what information is being withheld versus what is not. But you could also possess a responsive sense of empathy, feeling organically, moved to initiate communication or to help somebody because you sense that maybe something is wrong. And so this could help you act as a reliable grounding source in your immediate surroundings. But obviously, this will depend on which planet is your third house ruler, which is why I have some general talents for each ruling planet on the screen. So to experiment with these talents, try putting away the instructions for a hands-on task, whether cooking or drawing, whatever it may be, and allow your hands to dictate the next step by purely what feels correct, but also experiment with the way that you process your surroundings and find a way to communicate that comes naturally to you so that you can understand what specific directions that your talents can be applied to. When the ruler of your third house is in Leo, your mind and hands could operate on illumination and focus. And so you can excel at bringing, life to ideas and projecting your thoughts outward very clearly. And because astrology is all about potential, your internal mindset could be fueled by a willpower and the desire to leave a visible mark or to be authentically yourself in whatever you pursue. And you could be capable of pouring your energy into a singular vision, almost maintaining this unbroken concentration on a project because you are driven by a need to bring that idea to light. You could also be the type to execute physical tasks with confident movements. You could apply pressure or use broad gestures to maybe shape materials, for example, through your own sense of conviction. And you could also maybe naturally act as a centralizing force. In some way, you could possess a mind that identifies the brightest, most important part of a complex system and brings that to the forefront. So you may know how to focus on what matters versus what does not. And to protect your mental energy, you could be the type to naturally filter out the minor details that don't matter, which keeps your mind focused on generating a final product that actually aligns with your creative vision. And when engaging with your local environment, your communication could be designed to be seen and heard. So you could have a talent for captivating a room through your delivery, for example. Even if you are an introvert, this could be something you could hone it in on because you can emphasize almost the most vital parts of a story to ensure the information is actually impactful or it lands the way you want. And you could also speak with a natural projection, and you could carry a volume or a sense of warmth that makes you easily heard across so many environments, which makes you a potentially strong communicator when you need to cut through the noise. It's about confidence, though, when it comes to this. If you're not as confident, you could struggle with this. And this presence could allow you to take charge of maybe logistics, for example. You could be the type to make a good leader or to organize group plans or to direct how information should be distributed. But obviously, this will depend on which planet rules your third house, which is why I have some general themes for each planet on the screen. And so, to experiment with these talents, try explaining a mundane concept to somebody by focusing entirely on why it matters or what you think needs to be brought to light, and notice how easily you can hold their attention. But also, try to experiment with the way you apply your focus and find a way of expressing yourself that comes naturally so that you can understand what direction specifically your talents can be applied to. When the ruler of your third house is in Virgo, your mind and hands could operate on the ability to refine something, or you could have a very detail oriented way of operating with your mind or your hands. And you can excel at breaking down large concepts into their most useful components and to optimize how things function. But because astrology is all about potential, your internal processing could be very analytical, geared towards thoughtful application. You don't want to just fix something for the sake of it. You want it to be useful. So you could have a talent for detecting errors. You could possess an eye for identifying flaws, or like coding errors, for example, or inefficiencies in a system before anybody else notices them, for example. And you could also excel at detailed manual labor. You could handle tasks where micro adjustments are required to ensure a mechanism runs smoothly. And you could prefer to learn through systematic analysis. You could be the type to master softwares or tools or even art by testing variables to understand how the part serves the whole. And you could also have a gift for altering the tension or angle of, the physical tools that you use by a fraction of an inch to get a specific result. As you can kind of understand the relationship between action and output, you could be good at, something like archery, for example, because of that, if you can apply your mind. In your daily communications and local logistics, you are driven by usefulness. And so you could possess a talent for information filtering. You could take on a lot of data and divide them into manageable steps to be executed. And then when interacting with groups, for example, you could excel at cutting straight to the core of, the matter. You could skip over what doesn't matter to identify the actionable step you have to take. And you could have a talent for also delivering like practical advice that helps people, make their life better. And you could focus on the real world mechanics, and you could ground that advice in reality rather than, maybe being toxically optimistic, although you can be optimistic or maybe making suggestions that cannot be applied. But obviously, this will depend on which planet is your third house ruler, which is why I have some general talents each ruling planet may have on the screen. And so, to experiment with these talents, find an object or a process in your life that isn't working perfectly, break it down into its separate steps, analyze the efficiency, and then try to refine it yourself. And experiment with the way you apply that precision and find a pace of working mentally that just comes naturally to you so that you can understand the directions your actual talents can be applied to. When the ruler of your third house is in Libra, your mind and hands could operate on comparison and equilibrium. So you could excel at understanding concepts through the lens of another perspective and sort of adjusting your environment to achieve balance. But because astrology is all about potential, your internal mind could process data by weighing it against an exact opposite force. So you could have a talent for evaluating two different options in your head until you find the operational compromise, making you very good at resolving systemic deadlocks. You could also possess a natural sense of proportion and understand geometric balance when you're designing or drawing or even organizing maybe like physical items like on a desk, for example. And you could also, for example, maybe be skilled at spatial alignment, automatically arranging maybe objects or data points so that they are evenly distributed, and you can create systems that function without friction because of that. And when handling the physical world, you could intuitively know how to sort of adjust your movements and apply the exact amount of pressure or care necessary for whatever it is that you're touching, maybe without exerting too much force, or maybe you know exactly the amount of touch or the type of touch to put into whatever it is that you're doing. And when you're navigating your local environment and you talk with others, your communication could function as a balancing scale. So you could have a gift for identifying what is missing from a conversation and providing it. And you can know how to choose the exact right words to stabilize interactions and smooth over friction before a system breaks down. You could also possess a talent for mirroring the cadence of whoever you are talking to so that you can adjust your own communication style to match theirs, which really, opens the door for a flawless exchange of information. And you can also act as an objective mediator, and you could be capable of stepping back from an argument to assess the mechanics of both sides with fairness. And even your physical movement could be very, intentional, which kind of allows you to move through environments by adjusting your pace to match whatever is necessary in the moment. But obviously, this will depend on which planet is your third house ruler, which is why I have some general talents for each ruling planet on the screen. And so to experiment with these talents, try taking a strong opinion you hold and consciously arguing the exact opposite side in your head to see how the 2 points interact, and experiment with the way you calibrate your energy and find a way of communicating that comes naturally so that you actually understand the direction that your talents can be applied to. When the ruler of your third house is in Scorpio, like your girl here, your mind and hands could operate on probing and resource management. So you could excel at applying pressure to systems to understand the underlying power mechanics, kind of like what I do with astrology. And so, because astrology is all about potential, your internal mindset could be investigative and geared towards gaining control through deep understanding. You could have the mental stamina to drill down into a subject. You could research complex topics until you reach the absolute foundational root, leaving no variable untested. And you could possess a talent for deconstruction. You could be the type to physically take objects or ideas apart to see how the hidden mechanic kind of operates, making you somebody who is very good at troubleshooting. And you could also be very adept at applying physical force to maybe tools or outlets, allowing you to cut through or alter or transform resistant material. So if you are an artist, for example, you could be very good at recycling things. And when systems fail or a crisis occurs, you could be the type who your mind becomes clearer. So you could be very good at navigating emergencies in some way. So that's very useful in a lot of settings. In your communication and your local interactions, your energy is very piercing and concentrated. So you could have a talent for reading the power dynamics of a room, and you could intuit kind of the intentions behind what people are saying to map out the environment. You could be skilled at information like synthesis. You could be really good at, taking information and deriving what's important. You can condense things into a single sentence that cuts straight to the truth. And you could also maybe have an ability to maintain control over how data is distributed. And you could understand what information to release and what to withhold to kind of get the result that you need. And finally, you could possess the gift of asking the exact questions that kind of expose a flaw or that, direct something in the direction you need it to go. So you could push a situation towards a resolution by refusing to ignore the hidden issue. But obviously, that will depend on which planet is your third house ruler, which is why I have some more general talents for each planet on the screen. And so, to experiment with these talents, try taking a complex daily problem and repeatedly asking why until you strip away the surface variables and uncover the root mechanical cause. This is kind of what I do, but also experiment with the way you apply your focus and find a way of investigating that comes naturally to you so that you understand the direction that your talents can be applied to. When the ruler of your third house is in Sagittarius, your mind and hands could operate on conceptual scaling and trajectory. So you could excel at taking a single piece of data and expanding it to understand the broader purpose behind it. But because astrology is about potential, your internal processing could be expansive and constantly seeking to push beyond its current scope. And so you could be a master at connecting wide-ranging concept. You could take like a problem that's right in front of you and map it onto a larger theory of how a system works. You could have a talent for learning by throwing yourself into the deep end, and you could acquire new manual skills by tackling the advanced application first and then figuring out the basics as you go. And you could prefer to work with, sweeping physical movements rather than getting bogged down in the details. And you could possess a sense of, spatial abilities. You could be very good spatially. So you could grasp, for example, like you're in a big city, you could grasp the larger grid because your mind automatically zooms out to see the macro level. You could be very good at directions. And in your communication and local environment, you could act as somebody who grows something. You could have a talent for scaling up conversations, taking mundane daily topics and linking them to larger discussions about future potential. You could speak very bluntly, but very clearly, and you could have an ability to project your ideas outward without over filtering them because the goal is kind of to, understand the truth and to discuss it. So you're not going to hold things back, which is actually a skill because a lot of people like to filter themselves. And you could be skilled at broadening, your network if you are somebody who wants to go out there and network. Not everybody will want to. And you could be eager to exchange information with people who operate outside of your usual scope to gain new perspectives. And so ultimately, you could also excel at, kind of going past local frictions or immediate frictions. And you can be able to have this ability to move past daily inconveniences because your mind recognizes that they do not impact your larger trajectory. But obviously, this will depend on which planet is your third house ruler, which is why I have some general talents for each ruling planet on the screen. And so, to experiment with these talents, try zooming out next time you face maybe a frustrating thing in front of you and ask yourself how this tiny little, issue fits into the grand, goals that you have or the grand picture of your life. And experiment with the way you map your world and find, your place within that so that you can understand what direction you do want to grow in, because the direction you want to grow in is probably going to be the direction that your talents can be applied to. When the ruler of your third house is in Capricorn, your mind and hands operate on structural integrity or structure in general, but also maximization. So you could excel at processing information by testing its real world utility and how much it can bear. Like you will see how strong an idea is before you implement it. And because astrology is all about potential, your internal mindset could be, very structured or architectural and very results oriented. And so you could be excellent at creating maybe solid frameworks frameworks out of chaos. You could take loose data and structure it into clear systems that can be utilized. And you could have a talent for spatial maximization. So you could be the type who can pack a car very well or fit physical objects into a confined space with efficiency. And you could also be very good at puzzles as well because you can kind of systemically work through them. And you could be adept at maybe applying deliberate or controlled physical force to construct or maintain heavy materials, always focusing on maybe laying one solid brick after another. Even if this is with art, it doesn't have to be literal construction, but you could be good at that as well. And to protect your mental energy, you could be skilled at filtering incoming data based entirely on whether it offers a tangible return on investment. And you could be the type who is good at discarding information that does not serve a practical purpose. And when you communicate and navigate your day, you could provide reliable structure into whatever you put your mind to. So you could have talents for establishing, protocols or crafting a step-by-step instruction on how a system operates and ensuring the framework is foolproof. And this could be with something left-brained like a science or a math or a history, but also right-brained with like arts as well. And you could speak with a natural sense of authority, and you could carry a weight in your delivery that makes others kind of trust your logic, because your communication could be backed by facts and results, or you could know how to construct your argument. And you could be skilled at maintaining sort of the parameters of a conversation, and you could set firm boundaries to prevent discussions from wandering off topic so that an objective that you're having in a conversation is met. And finally, you could excel at finding the most economical route, not necessarily literally with money, although it could involve money. What I mean by that is you can navigate daily logistics by mapping out the path that kind of like is the most efficient with your time and resources. And, you order your tasks in a very strategic way. And obviously, this will depend on which planet is your third house ruler, which is why I have some general talents for each ruling planet on the screen. And so to experiment with these talents, I would try taking a vague abstract goal you have and drawing a literal blueprint of the specific steps required to achieve it, even if it's something small. And experiment with the way you kind of build frameworks and find a practical pace that comes naturally, just so you get a better understanding on how these talents can naturally be applied in your life. When the ruler of your third house is in Aquarius, your mind and hands could operate on an ability to kind of decentralize your mind and to observe things and to know kind of how to navigate those systems. So you could excel at viewing data points from an outside perspective and rearranging them in highly innovative ways. But because astrology is all about potential, your internal mind could process information by stepping completely outside of the traditional framework, but staying within the framework to kind of make it better. And you could be highly capable of observing a system without getting tangled in it, taking in incoming data, and separating the hard mechanics from any emotional bias. And you could possess a skill in systemic troubleshooting. You could be able to fix a computer or software or mechanical issues by understanding how everything connects, even if you're not an expert at that, or you could become an expert at that if you wanted. And you're not the type to treat a symptom in an isolated way. And you could be the type who knows how to figure out systems such as technology or laws through an existential sense of logic, and you could grasp its underlying design, knowing how things work from a very unique angle. Furthermore, you could have a knack for acquiring interesting or unorthodox mental and manual skills because you can find the unconventional mechanics kind of fun to hack. So if you're somebody who does art, or if you're somebody who, has a skill, you will do it your own way. And in communications and local interactions, you operate as an objective, visionary observer. So you could have a talent for breaking down highly complex or futuristic concepts, using pure logic to make abstract or out of the box ideas feel deeply accessible or kind of connect them to humanity. And you could be highly skilled at managing wide reaching networks, and you could have the ability to navigate massive community systems or group threads or local organizations by maintaining your broad perspective. And you could know automatically what role you're able to fill. And you could also be the type who could see local dynamics from an outside perspective, and you could observe an interaction from an existential distance to pinpoint exactly where the communication dynamic breaks down. And when a system fails, you can naturally excel at bringing objective reason back to the environment and stabilizing the space through what you understand, randomly. It almost seems like you know things, but you don't know why. But obviously, this will depend on which planet is your third house ruler, which is why I have some general talents for each ruling planet on the screen. So, to experiment with these talents, try viewing a localized daily problem as if you were observing it from an airplane 30,000 feet in the air, and see how stepping completely outside the system reveals a new innovative solution. But also experiment with the way you troubleshoot and find an objective rhythm that comes naturally so that you can understand the direction that your talents can be applied to. And finally, when the ruler of your third house is in Pisces, your mind and hands could operate on an ability to merge your mind or your hands and your skills into almost one entity so that you could absorb and translate information very beautifully. So you could, thrive in taking in your environment through immersing in it rather than relying on maybe linear or isolated steps. And because astrology is all about potential, your internal learning style could be very fluid and energetically open. And you could have a talent for absorbing information like a sponge, and you could take in a lot of complex data by grasping the overall conceptual vibe rather than memorizing rigid data points. So you could learn a lot with a lot less effort than a lot of signs as long as you know how to tap into this. And you could also excel at, learning mechanical tasks through osmosis. You could pick up exactly how to perform a physical movement or a task just by watching somebody else do it, as your mind will dissolve the barrier between observation and execution. And you could perform hands on work with a fluid, almost rhythmic motion, kind of adapting your movements to the materials rather than forcing them into a shape. And so it's almost like when you make an art or, you fix something, you have an ability to go on autopilot, which is kind of cool. And you could also rely heavily on energetic navigation, trusting sudden flashes of instinct to guide your daily movements, finding that this nonlinear approach yields results somehow. And in your local environment and your daily communications, you could be a master of energetic translation. So you could have a talent for sensing the unseen mechanics of a room, maybe picking up on the underlying energetic currents in some way. And you could also be skilled at adapting your communication style. You could shift your vocabulary, tone, or delivery to mirror the exact frequency of whoever you're talking to, which allows for information to pass between you effortlessly. And you could have a talent for explaining things through conceptual imagery. You could be very good at metaphors or art, which helps to transmit data more effectively and in a way that others can process, because not everybody is built like a computer. But you could also excel at maybe finding fluid workarounds, and you could be the type to resolve logistical problems, not by fighting the obstacle, but kind of by adapting your path to flow around it. But obviously, this will depend on which planet is your third house ruler, which is why I have some general talents for each ruling planet on the screen. So, to experiment with these talents, try communicating a complex thought to somebody without using, a language or a method that is too linear. Use imagery, a comparison, or a piece of art to see how easily you transmit the concept, but also see what do you tend to want to translate it as, because that could, give a hint as to what you could be good at. And experiment with the way you merge with your environment and find a flowing pace that comes naturally, just so you understand the directions that your talents can be applied to. When the ruler of your third house is in the first house, your mind and your physical presence are deeply connected. And because astrology is about potential, your learning style could be incredibly hands on. And so sitting still and reading a manual could maybe not engage your brain as much as actually getting up and moving. And for some reason, you could be the type to learn best by doing, maybe physically doing a task, giving you a highly individualized sense of touch. You could also maybe naturally come up with new concepts without waiting for somebody else to guide you. You could be very good at being an entrepreneur because of that, because you're the type who has very good ideas naturally because it comes so naturally to you. Out in the world, your physical presence kind of sets the tone for how you communicate. So you could find that speaking or writing feels like a direct extension of your body language, making you a highly effective communicator because your energy enters the room before you even speak. And you could prefer to navigate your local environment on your own schedule, maybe naturally charting your own path. But the trick here is to remember to occasionally sync up with the people around you, since your instinct is to move kind of in your own way. But obviously, this will depend on which planet rules your third house, which is why I have some general talents on the screen. And so, to experiment with these talents, try speaking your next big idea aloud while actively, walking or going about your day, and let your physical movement or your ideas or the instinct that your body feels drive your thought process, and see how it feels to initiate an idea or a conversation without hesitating, because this will help you to find a pace and a talent that is truly aligned with who you are. When the ruler of your third house is in the second house, your mental energy could be focused on turning abstract concepts into tangible reality. But because astrology is all about information, your mind could constantly look for the practical use of any incoming information. So you could prefer to see physical evidence before you fully buy into an idea, which can make you highly successful in managing resources, finances, or business, or even time. And you could have a real talent for translating a simple thought into a profitable or physical output, understanding exactly how to leverage what you know into something of lasting value. In your daily communications, you could deal in concrete facts. So you could handle physical assets or your time or your energy with great care and sensitivity, which is a huge advantage in crafts or maybe something like agriculture or any trade where you can shape raw materials or manage anything, whether it's time or energy. And when you speak, your words can carry a sense of physical weight. And so you could be a great negotiator because your communication style naturally builds trust and establishes clear worth in any setting. And you could also cultivate your local environment very deliberately, and you can add practical value to your surroundings over time as long as you maintain your consistency. But obviously, this will depend on which planet rules your third house, which is why I have some general planetary talents on the screen. So, to experiment with these talents, try writing down one abstract idea that you have and assigning it a specific material value. And then map out exactly how you would turn that idea into a reality. And then try to experiment with your rhythm and find a way of doing things that can really help you discover how to channel your talents, because if you can understand how you naturally operate, that's where your gold is going to lie. When the ruler of your third house is in its home placement, it's in your third house, your mind likely moves very fast. But because astrology is all about potential, your internal processing could involve taking in information quickly without sacrificing accuracy. You could thrive in maybe dynamic environments where you have to think quickly on your feet. And you could also find it easy to multitask across several different projects at once. But the trick is to actively protect your focus, because your intelligence relies on agility and can easily scatter if you don't direct it purposefully. When you communicate and navigate your day, you could act as the ultimate connector. You could have a real talent for bridging the gap between different groups or ideas, and you could easily cross pollinate information without needing to slow down and translate it. You could also be very highly adaptable and gather data in real time and adjust your plans based on that intel and base what's kind of happening in front of you. And if you do work with your hands, you could excel at tasks requiring quick reflexes or multitasking, and you could effortlessly coordinate multiple moving parts. But obviously, this will depend on which planet rules your third house, which is why I have some general planetary talents on the screen. So, to experiment with these talents, try connecting two people in your network or two ideas together that don't go together, because facilitating a quick exchange of ideas and kind of like messing with the information around you will help you discover how you naturally operate, which can help you understand your true talents. When the ruler of your third house is in the fourth house, your mind could naturally filter new information through the lens of memory and personal history. But because astrology is about potential, you could have an incredible ability to retain facts, largely because you don't accept data until you could link it to something you already know, and you could absorb that within your body. And you could manage the logistics of the root of any issues very perfectly. And you could, prefer routines that make you feel secure, which means you are good at making routines that make you feel secure. And you could have a talent for organizing and protecting physical spaces or emotional ones, making you highly effective in property management or curation, or just simply creating a deep, comforting, environment, whether it's at work or at home with your friends, you name it. In your relationships and communications, you could act as the anchor of memory. So you could easily build trust by honoring the history of a situation. You could be good at, knowing how to approach your friends and people that you care about, because you are great at absorbing what they need. And you will remember that every time you talk to them, even if it's within your body and not, actually consciously. And when you speak, your words could carry a deep psychological resonance. So you could utilize language to create safe perimeters. You could be the kind of person that others trust very easily with their most vulnerable thoughts. But the trick to managing this energy is simply remaining open to external updates rather than staying entirely within your comfort zone. But obviously, this will depend on which planet rules your third house, which is why I do have some general planetary talents on the screen. So, to experiment with these talents, try organizing one specific section of something that you deeply care about and try to optimize something in your life that is not optimized to make it feel safe. And create kind of like an outlet to streamline your daily thoughts. And when you do find a way of doing things that feel safe with you, this could help you discover how your true talents could show up. When the ruler of your third house is in the fifth house, your mental energy is highly creative and expressive. But because astrology is all about potential, your learning style could thrive on play and kind of gamifying whatever it is that you're doing. So you could process data best when you can turn it into something fun or expressive, engaging your intellect fully rather than just reading dry facts. You don't want to make the facts, boring. That's not what you're good at. You're good at making them fun. You could be a good teacher because of that. And you could also be a very dynamic strategist. You could be capable of assessing risk, but by like testing out different variables in real time rather than overanalyzing them. Out in the world, your communication could naturally command attention. You could share information in a way that, draws in an audience or draws in results. You could be an engaging public speaker, even if you don't like speaking, or an engaging storyteller in whatever you do. And your word choice could be colorful or dramatic. It could inject a sense of life into otherwise boring things. And you could excel at crafts or physical trades that require a performative display or a skill, something where you can create something that is fun or beautiful. And the trick to navigating your environment with your skills is to remember to just have fun, because you're the type who you actually perform better mentally when you are able to make something fun. And so don't ever feel bad for operating that way. But obviously, this is going to depend on which planet actually rules your third house, which is why I have some general planetary talents on the screen. So, to experiment with these talents, try turning something boring into a timed, observable game, or, try to find a way to make something fun and inject a sense of play into your routine, because this can help you find a way of doing things or tapping into a sense of passion that can help you, discover how you can effectively channel your true talents in your life. When the ruler of your third house is in the sixth house, your mind could operate in a way that strips away the excess to focus on the pure practical utility. But because astrology is all about potential, you could be the type to categorize massive amounts of information without getting overwhelmed, and your brain could easily file data into functional compartments, making you very organized. You could also possess a sharp talent for isolating inefficiencies or spotting the tiny errors or variables that other people miss. And this could make you good at, testing things or troubleshooting things, because you could be somebody who clearly understands how mental focus actually translates directly into physical results, into your life, into your routine. And in your daily communications and your routines, you could be a great problem solver. You could be the type to naturally adjust and perfect, your day-to-day life or the systems around you, always looking for a way to maintain and improve your environment. When you communicate, you could transmit highly functional, straightforward data in a way that is actually tangible to your day-to-day life. And this is crucial in technical fields as well, even technical art or, something like math or science, because you could easily cut through the noise to deliver exact, actionable instructions. And if you do work with your hands, you could excel at fine motor tasks that require sustained focus and being exact. But the trick here is to pace yourself to actively prevent burnout from constantly being of service. Obviously, though, this will depend on which planet rules your third house, which is why I have some general planetary talents on the screen. And so to experiment with these talents, try auditing one single daily routine in your life and remove exactly one unnecessary step to increase its overall efficiency. And try to find a way of doing things that can help you discover how you can channel your true talents. Because if you can understand where you're naturally geared towards, you can understand, how to find more joy in channeling those talents in your life. When the ruler of your third house is in the seventh house, your mind is wired to find balance and connection. You could be good at understanding others, or you could see things from other people's perspectives very easily. But because astrology is all about potential, your learning style could rely heavily on bouncing ideas off of other people or learning from, other people. And you could process information best in collaborative settings, kind of weighing different data points against each other to find the most balanced conclusion. If you are the type to work with your hands, you can naturally calibrate your body to achieve symmetry, making you very good at design or architecture or any field that requires harmony. And when you communicate, you could act as a natural mediator. You could act as a natural empath as well. And you could be very skilled at reading a room and mirroring the energy of the people in it, allowing you to alter your cognitive approach to match whoever you're talking to. So you could be very diplomatic. And you could also be good at equalizing the pressure during, tense conversations and using language specifically designed to find common ground with an opposing viewpoint, for example. But the trick is to make sure you maintain your own core stance in the process, because it is easy to, take in the data of others, and it's easy to almost believe that it is your own. But obviously, this will all depend on which planet rules your third house, which is why I have some general planetary talents on the screen. So to experiment with these talents, try mirroring the posture and speaking pace of the next person you talk to and observe how quickly it equalizes the pressure of the room. You don't have to do it in like a mocky way almost, but just, be aware of how your body adjusts when you do talk to somebody, because this will help you to find ways of doing things that can really help you discover where your talent when it comes to other people truly lies. When the ruler of your third house is in the eighth house, your mind could naturally penetrate beneath the surface to uncover what is hidden. But because astrology is all about potential, your mental processing could focus on deciphering maybe subtext and isolating the variables that others ignore. You could have the ability to sustain deep and unbroken focus, which could bring success in fields like psychology, investigation, data recovery. But you could also easily identify the underlying power dynamics in any situation, maintaining a lot of internal tension to navigate complex logistics, though the trick is knowing when it's safe to relax. In your communications, you could be the type who doesn't waste time on small talk. You could be the type who can strip away all of the superficial noise to deliver concise and compressed statements that hit the core truth of a matter immediately. And this could make you very good at research and a reliable sounding board during crisis. You could also have a natural talent for restructuring broken systems, seeing the exact point of failure that everybody else misses. If you're working with your hands or physically, though, you could be the type who could apply concentrated force to alter or dissect materials and thrive in reconstructive or precise trades or arts where you change kind of the structural integrity or the state of an object into something that is more powerful. But obviously, this will depend on which planet rules your third house, which is why I have some general planetary talents on the screen. But to experiment with these talents, try reading a piece of text and rewriting it using exactly half the word count without losing the core message, because this practice really helps you to hone in on making your mind powerful and effective rather than, getting lost in the quantity. And this can help you to find a way of thinking and doing things that can help you discover how to channel your true talents in your daily life. When the ruler of your third house is in the ninth house, your mind could be constantly zooming out to see the big picture. But because astrology is all about potential, your cognitive process could involve taking small details and instantly extrapolating them to forecast future trends. You could easily see how a minor variable fits into a much larger framework. And you could navigate your daily life by constantly pushing the boundaries of what you know, preferring forward motion over staying in one place. But the trick to this energy is simply remembering to still handle your mundane everyday life. Externally, you could communicate like a visionary. You could have a real talent for translating highly specialized, complex ideas into something accessible that anybody can understand. When you share information, you could broadcast your ideas widely. You could be a good teacher, a publisher, or a guide who focuses on the grand narrative rather than getting bogged down in the details. If you do work with your hands and body, you could be the type who is able to kind of like see the big picture and to, operate in broad, sweeping strokes, which is an advantage in large scale logistics where you have the physical space to operate broadly. So you can make things big, whether it's art or, writing or, if you're fixing something that's like a big machine, for example, you could be good at that as well. But obviously, this will depend on which planet rules your third house, which is why I have some general planetary talents on the screen. So, to experiment with these talents, try taking a highly localized and immediate problem and mapping out exactly how it applies to a much larger system, because this tests your extrapolation skills and helps you find a way of doing things that can help you discover how you can actually channel your true talents in your life. When the ruler of your third house is in the 10th house, your mind could be good at organizing information with authority and long term purpose. But because astrology is all about potential, your internal processing could focus heavily on turning raw data into structured, enduring systems. You could find great success in planning or management because you naturally prioritize information that builds something that will last or that builds a result that will help keep things moving. And you could act as a stabilizing force in your own life by defining physical and conceptual boundaries very clearly, and you could easily map out the rules and limitations of any environment you enter. In your public communications and your daily logistics, you could act as a definitive anchor. So, when you speak, you could communicate with a sense of authority. People could take you seriously, making you a great director or a manager whose words carry weight and establish reality in whatever setting you're in. You can naturally be the type to set firm protocols to keep things running smoothly, though the trick is allowing for occasional flexibility so you don't become too rigid. If you do work in a physical trade, you could execute very deliberate, sound, and steady movements. And this could apply to art as well, applying this sort of like practical force to build structures that are meant to stand the test of time and that are able to. But obviously, this will depend on which planet rules your third house, which is why I have some general planetary talents on the screen. So, to experiment with these talents, try writing a clear and detailed kind of operating procedure or step by step plan to perform a task in your life, and treat a mundane routine with seriousness, even if it's not that serious, because this can help you understand kind of how your leadership ability and your executive decision making works to help you truly channel your talents in effective ways. When the ruler of your third house is in the 11th house, your mind could naturally understand how all the moving parts of a system work together. You're good at seeing systems and webs. And because astrology is all about potential, your learning style could involve, seeing things from an existential perspective. You could easily integrate highly complex variables without getting confused, which could bring massive success in technology, data, community planning. You could be good at, planning events as well. And you could also be the type to observe group dynamics with a sense of, logic or detachment. So you could be good at like keeping a system running smoothly without getting caught up in it, because you're just seeing things as they are. And it's about understanding how to work around that information. That is your trick to success. Externally, you could be a natural systems innovator. You could be the type who can navigate your daily logistics by bypassing the standard rules entirely. You could be good at finding conceptual shortcuts that others could miss. And when you communicate, you could transmit information perfectly across large groups, making you a great community manager or a networker. You could be good on social media as well. And your speaking style could be designed for, broad distribution rather than intimate one-on-one exchange. Obviously, this will depend on your chart though. And if you work with your hands, you could grasp how circuitry or unconventional mechanics work very intuitively, which could help you, find hacks when it comes to fixing things or making art, whatever it may be. But the trick is to just remember to maintain your human connection and to maintain, a connection to what you're doing while you're kind of, going about your thoughts in your day to day life. But obviously, this will all depend on which planet rules your third house, which is why I have some general talents on the screen. So, to experiment with these talents, Try like picking one system in your life that, maybe isn't running smoothly. It doesn't have to be directly tied to your life. It could even be like a cause on social media, for example, and try to, just for fun, plan how you would make things better and more efficient. Because whatever your mind naturally goes to, whatever you naturally want to fix, and how you naturally want to fix it, pay attention to that because finding a way of doing things will help you discover how you naturally channel this energy, which can help you channel your true talents in a way that is really natural to your design. And finally, when the ruler of your third house is in the 12th house, your mind processes the world through deep intuition and quiet observation. But because astrology is all about potential, you could rely heavily on absorbing information directly from the unseen environment around you. You could process things very subconsciously. You could often synthesize data without needing it logically explained to you in some way, which could grant you the incredible intuitive ability to, really take in a lot of data, but not have to work through it very, minutely. And you could also navigate daily challenges by working around obstacles very fluidly rather than confronting them head on. And this could be good in a lot of settings. But the trick to this placement is actively grounding yourself since you naturally operate kind of outside of the spotlight and can easily absorb the stress of your surroundings. In your communication, you operate through deep, unseen empathy, so you could easily read the unsaid energy in any room, making you incredibly adaptable because you can fully immerse yourself into your environment. And when you share information, you could bypass standard logic entirely, kind of acting as a creative or spiritual guide who transmits ideas through subtle, energetic, or purely symbolic channels like art or music. And if you are the type to work with your hands, you could execute tasks by maybe molding to the resistance of the material. You could become one with what you are doing. And you could be the type to refuse to force an outcome, which could make you brilliant in fluid arts or holistic practices where you kind of got to channel the subconscious. But obviously, this will depend on which planet rules your third house, which is why I have some general planetary talents on the screen. So, to experiment with these talents, try completing a standard manual task 2 day in total silence and see what task you're drawn to and focus only on the physical sensation of the materials and the quiet energy of the room rather than step by step instructions, because this can help you to find a way of doing things that could help you discover how you actually channel your true talents. When Aries is on the cusp of your fifth house, depending on the placement of Mars, which is the ruler of your fifth house, your capacity for joy and creation are fueled by cardinal fire, so quick movement and unrestricted action. If you are somebody who wants to be creative, whether you're building a business or drafting a novel or performing an art, you could excel when creating concepts completely from scratch, thriving on the friction of starting something entirely new. And your performance style and charisma could command an audience or a result through movement, bravery, and passion, meaning your source of passion is what will give you a result in some way. As an entrepreneur or a risk taker, you could have the potential to make fast and decisive decisions, kind of acting as a highly independent solo founder who can trust their gut over, maybe the trap of mulling over the data too much. And your leadership, if that is something you're interested in, could be highly motivational, sparking action in others by leading the charge yourself. Playfully, your communication as well could manifest as quick-witted banter. You could be very good at, teasing. And if you do flirt, it will be direct. And if you are interested in maybe teaching children or guiding the youth, you could guide them by encouraging independence, courage, and the value of active, uninhibited play. But looking at the ruler of your fifth house by sign and house will obviously provide more insight into how this could look for you. When Taurus is on the cusp of your fifth house, depending on the placement of its ruler, which is Venus, your capacity for joy and creation could be grounded in fixed earth. So, materialization, accumulation, and sustained endurance. So, your creative ventures could have the potential to take on highly tangible forms. You could be the type to build a brick and mortar business. You could do classical arts or crafts, and you could do so in a way that is designed for longevity or aesthetic value. And your performance style or charisma could captivate a room through a deeply grounded presence and a powerful vocal or physical sense of resonance. You could be very pleasing if you do want to perform. And as an entrepreneur, your risk taking could be highly calculated, relying on kind of, a resource backed speculation to build foundations for what it is that you speculate. And your leadership could inspire others through steady reliability and the promise of either material or aesthetic comfort or pleasure. And playfully, your communication could utilize slow burn humor, sensual charm, and tactile flirtation. And if you do want to teach youth or be involved with children, you could be the type who can teach them immense patience, the value of nature, and how to craft tangible resources with their own hands. But looking at the ruler of your fifth house by the sign and the house will provide more insight into how this will look for you specifically. When Gemini is on the cusp of your fifth house, depending entirely on the placement of your Mercury, your capacity for joy and creation is driven by mutable air. So quick dispersion, cross-pollination, and synthesizing data. So your creative ventures could be very multi-dimensional, giving you the potential to excel in something like tech or journalism, maybe diverse writing projects, or businesses that translate complex data into something more digestible. Your performance style and charisma, if it interests you, could command an audience or a result through maybe unmatched linguistic agility. Maybe you're good at storytelling and you're just really funny. Maybe you could be a comedian. As an entrepreneur, your risk taking could involve maybe spinning multiple plates simultaneously, then speculating on varied streams of income, and then pivoting quickly when the market shifts. You could be somebody who maybe changes what you pursue very frequently in your life. And your leadership could motivate others by stimulating intellectual curiosity. And maybe you're able to take, multiple people's perspectives and turn it into something brilliant. Playfully, your communication could excel at clever wordplay. Maybe you're a very engaging person to talk to when it comes to like playful conversation. And if you do flirt, it's probably very intelligent. And if you're nurturing, young people or teaching them, or you want to be a teacher, you could be the type who can keep their minds constantly engaged. You could teach them coding, multiple languages, or how to question the world around them. But looking at the ruler of your fifth house by sign and house will obviously provide more insight into how this could look for you specifically. When Cancer is on the cusp of your fifth house, depending entirely on the placement of your moon, your capacity for joy and creation is governed by cardinal water, initiating emotional flow, containment, resonance, passion. And so your creative ventures could have the potential to center around protecting or nurturing others or creating art or a business that evoke deep historical or nostalgic or emotional weight. Or you could, maybe tend to something that really brings you passion. And your performance style and charisma could captivate by maybe instantly reading a room's energy, then establishing a deeply intimate, emotionally safe atmosphere that draws people in. There could be something about you that is emotionally resonant, and that's kind of, your superpower when it comes to that. And as an entrepreneur, your risk taking could be tied kind of to, securing foundational bases. So you could prioritize ventures that create a deep sense of psychological security or safety or emotional resonance, whether that's for yourself and what you enjoy or what others need to feel protected. And your leadership could inspire through maybe empathy. You could motivate others by making them feel like they truly belong and you can relate to them. Playfully, your communication could utilize maybe inside jokes, nostalgia-based humor, and if you do flirt, you could have a deeply intuitive and caring kind of like tone to that. And when guiding youth or, teaching the youth, if you want to be a teacher, you could excel at creating emotional safeguards. You could teach them how to process their feelings, or you can make them feel safe while you are teaching them whatever subject it may be. But looking at the ruler of your fifth house by sign and house will obviously provide more insight into how this will look for you personally. When Leo is on the cusp of your fifth house, depending on the placement of your sun, obviously, you are operating within this house's natural energy, which makes your capacity for joy and creation radiate with fixed fire. And this kind of means taking your heat and making something almost out of that authenticity. And because it's fixed fire, it doesn't really give up its vision that easily. And so your creative ventures could have the potential to be maybe highly visible or centralized masterpieces in whatever way resonates with you, whether you're leading a massive brand, directing a film, maybe you're writing a book, or executing art that reflects your purest identity and sense of self. And your performance style and charisma could possess an undeniable gravitational pull. It allows you to command the spotlight and captivate an audience or a result simply by being yourself. If you do have an interest in being an entrepreneur, your risk taking could be driven by self belief. You could speculate on ventures by pouring all of your energy and your pride and creative power into them. And your leadership could inspire people through your warmth. You could uplift others by showing them how to find their own inner light. And playfully, your communication could be a little bit dramatic. You could be a little bit engaging, and you could be very generously flirtatious when you are engaging in, that playful banter. And when nurturing youth or teaching them, if you want to be a teacher, you could act as the ultimate hype man or cheerleader, encouraging self-expression and authenticity and a true sense of joy through other people. But obviously, looking at the ruler of your fifth house by sign and house will provide more insight into how this will look for you specifically. When Virgo is on the cusp of the fifth house, depending on the placement of your Mercury, which is the ruler of Virgo, your capacity for joy and creation is defined by mutable earth, which is kind of the energy of microscopic adjustment, discernment, and refining systems to make them better. So your creative ventures could have the potential to rely on detailed craftsmanship. You could be the type who's into complex coding or building businesses specifically designed to solve granular mechanical problems that need, optimizing. If you are somebody who is drawn to performance, your performance style and charisma could captivate through maybe technical perfection. You're the type who lets your results almost speak for themselves. And so you could be the type to maybe execute something to a level of skill, and that level of skill could be what impresses people. As an entrepreneur, your risk taking could be highly calculated and analytical. You could build enterprises or you create anything upon optimized, highly functional systems rather than a blind leap of faith. And your leadership could motivate through competence. You could act as a functional, guide that can help people move forward when they don't know what step to take next. And playfully, if you are somebody who wants to engage in flirting or, fun conversation, your communication style could utilize maybe dry, witty, maybe even, like a self-deprecating humor in some way, or at the very least, highly clever wordplay. And if you are somebody who is interested in teaching children or, guiding the youth, you could teach them through the deep value of skill building, logic, and how to achieve practical independence. But obviously, your Mercury placement by sign and house will provide more insight into how this could look for you specifically. When Libra is on the cusp of your fifth house, depending on the placement of your Venus, which is the ruler of Libra, your capacity for joy and creation is defined by cardinal air. So something about what you create could initiate symmetry. It could, be designed to balance scales in some way. And it could also involve comparative analysis. So your creative ventures could have the potential to help you excel in collaborative design or fashion, architecture, or even businesses that are specifically built to bridge gaps and create harmony in some way. And your performance style, if this is something that, appeals to you, could command attention through how you carry yourself with grace. There could be something about the aesthetic balance or maybe the ability to mirror the audience's desire that kind of almost gets you, the applause or gets you recognition if that is something that interests you. And as an entrepreneur, your risk taking could thrive on joint ventures, and maybe you would be good as a co-founder in something. You could be the type who invests in partnerships that provide mutual leverage, or you would obviously, when you do speculate or try to invest in something, it will have you will have a big list of pros and cons before deciding what that looks like. And your leadership could inspire others by maybe mediating conflict. You could be the type to ensure all voices are equalized to achieve a goal in some way. And when it comes to playful communication or flirting, you could excel at highly calibrated, charming flirtation and almost this smooth diplomatic banter. Like you could be funny, but you don't really cross the line that much. And when teaching or nurturing young people or children, you could thrive in teaching them the art of fairness, social grace, or you could be able to teach them how to do something beautiful or to see all sides to a story. But obviously, this will depend on where your Venus is by sign and house. And so I would look at those timestamps because this could provide much more insight into how this will look for you specifically. When Scorpio is on the cusp of your fifth house, depending entirely on the placement of its ruler, which is Mars, that's the traditional ruler. It's also ruled by Pluto. For this video, we will touch on Mars because it is a more personal placement. So your capacity for joy and creation is driven by fixed water. So it's your ability to concentrate your energy, sustain intensity to create, and penetrate the unseen that can provide you creative talent. So your creative ventures could have the potential to be intensely transformative. You could be the type to execute psychological research, investigative media, or a business built on uncovering hidden value and restructuring power dynamics in some way. Your performance style and charisma, if that interests you, could captivate through a quiet, magnetic, and deeply intense presence that demands absolute focus from an audience or maybe even a result, and people may almost be mesmerized by what you say or perform or create. And as an entrepreneur, your risk taking could involve massive all or nothing speculations. You could show resilience or drive in highly volatile or taboo markets. And your leadership as well, if that is something that interests you, could motivate by guiding others through crises and facilitating total systemic rebirth, meaning you will unveil all variables in whatever you are leading in, and this can inspire people. Playfully, maybe within joy inspiring communications or flirting, you could be the type to utilize dark humor, maybe intense psychological flirtation, like you can stare into somebody's soul and know what they need to hear. But also, you could utilize maybe unspoken cues. Your eyes could be powerful, and this could help you to communicate playfully or flirt as well. And so, when guiding or teaching youth, for example, you could be the type who can nurture them by validating their deepest shadows. Maybe you teach them deep psychological survival skills, or you could teach them how to research. But looking at the ruler of your fifth house or your Mars by sign and house will obviously provide more insight into how this could look for you specifically. When Sagittarius is on the cusp of your fifth house, like your girl here, depending entirely on your Jupiter placement, your capacity for joy and creation is defined by mutable fire, which is all about distributing or sharing heat. This is about outward projection and mapping out ideas. And your creative ventures could have the potential to scale massively. You could build cross-cultural businesses. You could be a creative teacher almost, or you could produce art that makes people question the meaning of life. Your performance style and charisma, if that calls to you as well, could command an audience or a result through infectious enthusiasm, humor, or inspiring storytelling. And you could share something new as well with other people, which could command creative results. And as an entrepreneur, your risk taking could thrive on high stakes, speculative leaps of faith, and you could actually do better looking at the macro level potential of something rather than worrying about the tiny details. And your leadership could motivate others through your role as a visionary. You could constantly push others past their perceived limits towards the horizon. So you could be the type to encourage people towards growth. And then also playfully or in flirting and engaging in fun conversations, your communication could be very bluntly funny, it could be joyful, and it could be almost existential in some way. And when nurturing or teaching youth or teaching children, you could be the type who can educate them by maybe exposing them to diverse cultures, grand theories, and a sense of limitless possibility. But obviously, look at your Jupiter placement by sign and house because this will provide more insight into how this could look for you specifically. When Capricorn is on the cusp of your fifth house, depending entirely on your Saturn placement, your capacity for joy and creation is defined by cardinal Earth. Applying gravitational weight, establishing boundaries, and organizing spaces could be how your creative talent is kind of derived or channeled. So your creative ventures could have the potential to maybe build, enduring businesses. You could have a very good business mindset, and this could be fun for you. Maybe you could be involved in arts that require you to build skill over time, kind of like drawing, for example. Like me, I don't have Capricorn in my fifth house, and I never became a drawer because I didn't want to take the skills to become a good drawer. I have Sagittarius in my fifth house. You could be very good at that, or basically anything where structure is the skeleton of what you are building. So your performance style and charisma could make you somebody who could really command a room through authority or gravitas or an undeniable aura of competence, meaning when others are in awe of your creations, it's because your results or the work you put into it will really show for some reason. As an entrepreneur as well, your risk taking could involve slow or highly strategic and deliberate speculations that are designed to secure long-term dominance over a market, for example. And your leadership, if this calls to you, could inspire people by providing the ultimate structural framework. You could be the type to define reality and setting the standard for those you are on a team with. And then playfully or within flirting, your communication could utilize dry, almost deadpan humor and an understated charm, but the ones who get it are gonna get it. And then when guiding others or teaching youth, you could be the type to teach them the importance of discipline, the value of hard work, how to master their physical limitations, or you could just be good at developing curriculums in general. But looking at the ruler of your fifth house, your Saturn placement by sign and house will obviously provide more insight into how this could look for you specifically. With Aquarius on the cusp of your fifth house, depending entirely on the placements of the rulers Saturn and Uranus, although I would look at Saturn as that is the traditional ruler, so it will be more personal. And so your capacity for joy and creation is electrified by fixed air, meaning your creative talents are best applied through how you stabilize or interact with systems, your connection to the larger web, and kind of like this detached, point of view and a willingness to do things your own way. You will not follow, the beaten path when it comes to your creative adventures. And because your creative ventures could have the potential to be out of the box, you could be the type to maybe build, for example, a disruptive tech startup, and that could be fun for you. You as well could be the type to engage in maybe digital communities and channel your creative energy that way. Or you could open a business that revolutionizes maybe group systems, scientific thought, or that takes the needs of systems and humanity and somehow makes things better. It's like your creative vision comes from the future almost, and you're bringing that to the present. And your performance style or charisma, if that connects to you or if you want to do that, could captivate others by your ability to present out of the box concepts that actually connect to people. So you could be a good comedian on one hand or a good TED talker on the other end with this placement. As an entrepreneur, if you do take risks, you would be the type who should take risks involving speculating on futuristic, highly unconventional ideas that bypass, what is standard entirely. And your leadership style, if this calls to you, could motivate others potentially by flattening the hierarchy. You will see others as equals and you will treat them as such. You could unite the collective as well around a shared progressive ideal rather than ego, and you're all homies essentially, and that's how you lead. And if you are the type who is playful or you like to flirt, your communication could be the type to push the line, but it could be very witty and reliant on highly intellectual or rebellious banter. If you do want to teach the youth or nurture the youth, you could be the type to encourage absolute individuality. You could teach them to question societal rules and how to use critical thinking and to make the world a better place. But looking at the ruler of your fifth house specifically by sign and house will provide more insight into how this could look for you specifically. Pisces on the cusp of your fifth house, depending on the placement of your Jupiter, which is the traditional ruler. Neptune is the modern ruler, but Jupiter is a personal placement, so I do connect that more with talent. So your capacity for joy and creation could be boundless. It is driven by mutable water, which is all about dissolving perimeters, fluid merging, and absorbing and dispersing energy. So what I mean by that is that your creative interests could have the potential to channel highly imaginative, shape-shifting art, for example, spiritual and healing practices, or you could be the type to open a fluid business that maybe adapts to collective trends, or you could have the ability to create in a way that heals. And your performance style and charisma could captivate by maybe blending with the audience's emotional frequency. You could be the type who could create spellbinding, deeply empathetic illusions, or really connecting with people on a soul level, whether it's with your art, your speaking, whatever it is that you're creating. As an entrepreneur as well, your risk taking could be based entirely on psychic intuition and subtle energy shifts rather on hard data and standard logic. And in leadership settings, your leadership could inspire through universal empathy and a dreamy vision. You could be the type who can motivate others by connecting them to a divine or collective vision. Playfully or within flirty conversation, your communication could utilize subtle, symbolic humor and deeply resonant. You could have an enchanting way of speaking that almost pulls people in. And if you do want to teach or guide the youth, for example, you could be the type who could teach them compassion. You could teach them art or how to be, artistically fluid and how to trust their imagination. And you could be very empathetic to their needs. But looking at the ruler of your fifth house, obviously, which is your Jupiter by sign and house, will provide more insight into how this will look for you specifically. When the ruler of your fifth house is in Aries, your creative process could be very straightforward or action oriented. And because astrology is all about potential, your internal approach to play may not involve waiting around for inspiration. You could be the type who's good at generating it simply by getting started. And you could find that your best ideas arrive when you are physically moving or using momentum or your drive as a primary muse. And you could excel at diving into an unfamiliar creative medium without any prior instruction, trusting your instinct to figure it out as you go instead of overthinking the process. And when you share your creativity, you are direct and uninhibited. You could find joy in executing quick projects that you start and finish in a single setting. You could use speed to bypass perfectionism. And when you step up and present an idea, you could captivate a room simply through your willingness to take the first step. You could also maybe find that a little friendly competition naturally accelerates your creative output, whether you're being competitive with yourself or other people. And when you are guiding beginners, you could act as a great coach and you could teach people how to trust their instincts and play without worrying about making mistakes. And so to experiment with these talents, try starting a new project today and force yourself to finish a rough draft in under 10 minutes or in under an hour or within a day at the very least without stopping to edit. And let your momentum lead the way and find a fast-paced creative rhythm that keeps you from burning out and helps you to understand what you're good at. When the ruler of your fifth house is in Taurus, your creative process could be very steady and highly physical. But because astrology is all about potential, your internal approach to self expression could be centered around turning ideas into something very tangible. And you could draw your muse directly from the material world. You could find inspiration in textures, scents, environments, colors. And you could also find peace in repetitive hands on tasks. Feeling the most creative when you are working with physical materials and shaping them slowly. Externally, you could create things that are meant to last, and you could prefer to spend time perfecting a single project rather than rushing through multiple quick projects. And when you share your work, you could hold the room with a calm, grounded presence rather than relying on loud theatrics. And you could express your unique spark by creating spaces that naturally soothe the people who experience them. And when guiding beginners, you could excel at teaching the value of patience and show people how to build something step by step. And so to experiment with these talents, try a project today that requires you to use your hands. And so focus entirely on the physical sensation of the materials and find a steady rhythm of play that can help you understand how your creative talents can be channeled. When the ruler of your fifth house is in Gemini, your creative process is curious and highly adaptable. And because astrology is all about potential, your internal approach to play could involve connecting different ideas to invent something new. You could draw inspiration from learning random facts, reading, or simply observing the fast paced environment around you. And you could also enjoy combining two completely unrelated hobbies or concepts to see what your brain can generate. When you share your creativity, you could be highly interactive. And so you could channel your energy into building multiple versions of a product. You could test variables very quickly to see what works best. You could also captivate an audience through quick wit. You could use humor or engaging storytelling to hold their attention. You could even view networking as a form of creative expression, and you could find joy in introducing people just to watch what ideas spark between them. And when guiding beginners, you could excel at teaching them to question their environment, keeping their minds engaged with puzzles, and teaching them how to critically think. And so, to experiment with these talents, try working on a creative task today by forcing two completely unrelated concepts together just to see what happens. And let your curiosity lead the way, as this can help you to understand how your creative talents could be channeled. When the ruler of your fifth house is in Cancer, your creative process is intuitive and driven by memory. And because astrology is all about potential, your internal approach to play could involve channeling your emotions directly into your work. You could draw inspiration from your own memories and use nostalgia as a powerful muse. You could find joy in curating collections that preserve a specific personal history or an era or that evoke that from other people. Furthermore, you could create your best work when you allow yourself to absorb the mood of a room, executing a project entirely by feeling rather than strict logic. And externally, your creative expression evokes a sense of safety. You could view the design of a private, comforting environment as a deep creative outlet. You could build spaces that recharge the people in them. And when you share your work, you could draw people gently inward to establish a calm atmosphere rather than shouting for attention. And when you're, guiding beginners, you could act as a natural protector or an empath. You could validate other people's feelings and create a safeguard that allows them to play or experience joy freely. To experiment with these talents, try creating a piece of output or designing a space that is specifically intended to recreate the feeling of a comforting memory. And let your emotions guide the creative choices, as this can help you understand how your creative talents can be channeled. When the ruler of your fifth house is in Leo, your creative process is highly expressive and self directed. And because astrology is all about potential, your internal approach to play could be fueled by a desire to leave a personal mark or to be true to yourself. And you could draw inspiration directly from your own life experiences, utilizing yourself or your experiences as the creative canvas. And you could find joy in injecting your personal signature into everyday routines, and you could easily turn a simple task into something that is a big or fun event just because you can. And that is a skill that not a lot of people have. And out in the real world, you could naturally command attention if you so choose to do so. You could prefer to create your output using maybe broad, dramatic strokes, and you could refuse to hide your work, or you could do best when you don't hide your work, even if you're naturally shy. And you could naturally captivate a room through a warm gravitational pull, and you could hold the attention of an audience through your confidence and your authenticity, and that can actually inspire people. And you could express your spark by uplifting those around you and sharing your creative process in a way that naturally draws people in. And when you may be teaching beginners, for example, you could act as a great cheerleader, encouraging people to be bold and completely authentic with how they express their joy and their play. And so, to experiment with these talents, try taking a completely mundane or boring thing in your life and execute it and make it, more theatrical or more joyous, and allow yourself to take up space just for the fun of it, and let yourself be confident, because this can help you to understand how your creative talent can be channeled. When the ruler of your fifth house is in Virgo, your creative process is analytical and focused on refinement. But because astrology is all about potential, your internal approach to play could involve achieving technical mastery. And so you could draw inspiration from a desire to fix what is broken. You could utilize inefficiencies in your environment as the spark for your creativity as well. And you could find a sense of joy maybe in taking a flawed project and systematically editing it down into a highly functional core. And you could also maybe prefer to master the micro details of a technique through repetition, finding beauty in systems that work flawlessly. Or if you do an art, it could have a very high attention to detail. And when you share your creativity, you could shine through your competence and you could express your spark by organizing chaotic spaces, creating output that is maybe minimalistic or clean and highly useful. And you could captivate an audience not through being loud or being dramatic. You could be the type who can execute a skill with such technical mastery that it leaves people in awe. And when guiding beginners, you could excel at teaching them maybe practical life skills and show them exactly how to build self-confidence through independence and through maybe the details of mastering whatever it is that they're pursuing. And so to experiment with your talents, take a piece of output that you've already created and actively edit it, refine it, and find joy in that process of refining or cutting and optimizing. And so if you do that, you can understand kind of how your mind works, and this can help you to understand how your creative talent can be channeled. When the ruler of your fifth house is in Libra, something about your creative process is balanced and collaborative. But because astrology is all about potential, your internal approach to play could rely heavily on symmetry or connection. And you could draw inspiration from the people you interact with. You could utilize social dynamics or harmony or balance or fairness as your creative canvas. You could also find joy in maybe inviting another person directly into your process, and you could use them as a sounding board to help you shape your final product. And you could also prefer to maybe design spaces or output that rely on geometric or color balance. If you are somebody who is into maybe something artsy or design related, finding inspiration in clean proportion. Externally, though, your self expression could be highly harmonious, so you could express your spark by actively curating symmetry in your environment. And you could use your creative output to restore a sense of peace to something that is chaotic or sense of beauty to something that is not. And when you share your work, you could captivate a room through maybe charm or grace, moving in a way that immediately puts everybody else at ease because it considers them. And when guiding beginners, you could excel at teaching them the art of compromise or the art of balance or the art of seeing all angles. And you could show them how to appreciate beauty and to share the spotlight and to have fun within the process of creating something in general. And so to experiment with these talents, try collaborating on a small creative task and deliberately maybe allow for an outside perspective's input to shape the final product, even if it's online. And let your sense of balance sort of guide what you create, as this can help you to understand how that balance works in your life, and it can help you to understand how your creative talent can be channeled. When the ruler of your fifth house is in Scorpio, your creative process is investigative and defined by psychological depth. But because astrology is all about potential, your internal approach to play could involve stripping away the superficial to reveal the truth beneath. You could draw maybe inspiration from the hidden or the unspoken and utilize movements of intensity as your canvas. And you could find joy in taking an existing concept, dismantling it down to its core components, and rebuilding it into something more powerful. And you could also prefer to dive maybe into a single subject until you master it completely, rather than casually exploring multiple shallow interests. And when you share your self expressions, it could be highly powerful, and you could create output that asks specific, uncomfortable questions or that evokes powerful thoughts, forcing your audience to address the elephant in the room. You will make a statement. And you could captivate people through a quiet, intensely focused presence and draw them in by radiating a sense of absolute control and mystery. And when you are teaching beginners at something, you could act as a deep guide, and you could validate their darker emotions and teach them how to build resilience to protect their creative energy or how to transform something into another state. So to experiment with these talents, try taking a piece of your own output today and cutting away exactly half of it, and force yourself to compress the message until only the raw core remains, as this can help you understand how your creative talent can be truly channeled. When the ruler of your fifth house is in Sagittarius, your creative process operates on expansive vision and forward momentum. But because astrology is all about potential, your internal approach to play could involve synthesizing the big picture, scaling your ideas, creating something big. And you could draw inspiration from exploring different philosophies, maybe travel, or being open in spaces that trigger big picture thinking. And you could find joy in scaling up a small idea into a massive project, completely refusing to be limited by immediate boundaries. And you could also prefer to execute your vision using broad strokes, focusing on the grand narrative without worrying about the tiny details. Out in the world, your self expression could be very infectious or bold, and you could have the ability to express your spark by stating the blunt, humorous, or big truth or the big picture. And you could use creative output to point out maybe the absurdity of everyday life. And you could effortlessly captivate an audience through optimism, commanding a stage by projecting your voice and moving with the sweeping energy. You could have something very big about what you express, and that is your hook. And when you're guiding beginners, you could act as a limitless teacher, showing them the vast possibilities of the world and encouraging them to expand their worldview through open exploration. So, to experiment with these talents, try creating a piece of output today that focuses entirely on the big picture message of your life over the next 10 years and completely ignore any immediate details that may feel like it's holding you back. And you need to let your optimism stretch the boundaries because it's when you do this that you can understand, how your energy is naturally directed and how your creative talents can be channeled. When the ruler of your fifth house is in Capricorn, your creative process could be very practical, results oriented, focused on building structure and laying one brick after another. But because astrology is all about potential, your internal approach to play could involve turning something chaotic into something that is architecturally sound. And you could draw inspiration from maybe history, classical techniques, or the desire to build a creative framework that will outlast your own lifetime, or the desire to build a creative framework that you can do sequentially and master over a long period of time. And you could find that you create best when you treat your playtime with the exact same discipline and scheduling that most people would associate maybe with a career or a workout routine. And you could prefer to study the traditional rules of a concept step by step before attempting to innovate. And then you can do, once you get the basics down, then you can kind of, start to stretch the boundaries. And when you share your creativity, you could be the type who can command respect with what you create. And you could express your spark by filtering out unnecessary noise. You could deliver high functioning output that is often disguised with dry humor. And you could captivate an audience through your persistence or your knowledge. Your knowledge could be something that really, defines you. And you could hold a stage by projecting an aura of competence and control. And when teaching beginners, for example, you could act as a grounding guide and you could teach them the value of hard work and show them exactly how to conquer their limitations to achieve mastery. Or you could be good at teaching a curriculum that has to take things step by step. So, to experiment with these talents, try drafting a literal step by step blueprint today for how you would turn your favorite casual interest into a fully functioning structure. And let your discipline guide your imagination because this can help you to understand how your creative talent can be channeled on an individual level. When the ruler of your fifth house is in Aquarius, your creative process could march to the beat of its own drum, and it could be fueled by objective detachment and innovating something that already exists and focusing on systems. And because astrology is all about potential, your internal approach to play could involve grasping the overarching grid and bypassing standard rules. And so you could draw inspiration from avant garde theories, science fiction, or the desire to revolutionize how concepts are traditionally created. And you could find joy in deliberately breaking the rules of a medium just to see what kind of abstract system emerges from the chaos. And you could also prefer to use completely unorthodox tools or technology to achieve your result, proving that there's always more than one way to build something. So this could be with art or business, whatever you want to create. Externally, though, your self expression could be very original or intellectually stimulating. You could express your spark by maybe acting as a rational anchor in a chaotic room. You could be the type who's very good at delivering information that pushes people to think out of their comfort zone. You could deliver unorthodox ideas very well, and you could have dry humor in some cases. And you could also captivate an audience by maybe presenting something crazy with cool objectivity. And you could be good at maybe breaking down the system as a whole and helping people to understand that better. And when you're guiding beginners, you could act as a freeing or liberating teacher, and you could encourage individuality, scientific curiosity, or a healthy rebellion against, the things that limit them. And so to experiment with these talents, try approaching a project today by completely ignoring the traditional rules of the medium and use your entirely unconventional method of approaching creativity to achieve your result. And let your spirit really take the lead, because if you really lean into who you are and what you want to do, this can help you to understand how your creative talents can be channeled. And then when the ruler of your fifth house is in Pisces, your creative process is very fluid, intuitive, and relies on imagination. You could have a great imagination. And because astrology is all about potential, your internal approach to play could involve acting as a conduit for inspiration. You could draw your muse from your dreams, the collective unconscious, or the subtle energetic currents of a room or your life. And you could find joy in allowing a project to unfold entirely by accident and letting the medium itself dictate the final shape without forcing a specific outcome. And you could also prefer to use your playtime to induce a flow state where you kind of lose track of all time and merge completely with the activity. And when you share your self expression, you could dissolve the barriers between reality and dreams. You could communicate through symbols, music, visual cues, and you could have the ability to convey something complex without relying on logic. And you could get your point across by doing that very well. And you could mesmerize an audience by blending with their emotional frequency and create something empathetic, something spellbinding. And when nurturing or teaching beginners, you could excel at teaching compassion and show people how to safely surrender control and to trust their inner voice. You could be a very good spiritual guider with this placement. So to experiment with your talents, try creating a piece of output today while listening to music, or, really being in a setting that you can almost merge with, and allow the rhythm and emotion of the sound, the smells, the sights to completely dictate your movement, and let your intuition absorb the energy. Because if you pay attention to what this is like, this can help you to understand how your creative talent can be channeled. When the ruler of your fifth house is in the first house, your creativity could be tied directly to your identity and physical presence. And you yourself, in some way, might be the living embodiment of your projects. And you could find your best inspiration when you are moving or active or leaning into your authenticity and leading the charge. And so, some creative talents you could have is you could be good at developing a personal brand where you act as the face of the work. You could be good at solving problems through physical movement. Meaning, like if you're brainstorming, for example, while walking, that could actually be when your best ideas show up. It's when you're focused on yourself that, your best ideas could come up. You could be good at starting independent ventures quickly without waiting for a committee. And you could be good at captivating a room just by presenting as your authentic and unapologetic self. And so to experiment, start with a project today where you are the primary driving force and refuse to hide behind a team or a company name with whatever it is that you create. When the ruler of your fifth house is in the second house, your creativity could focus on making things tangible, valuable, and built to last. And you could find a lot of joy in turning abstract ideas into physical realities or measurable assets. And so, some creative talents you could have is you could be good at building lasting physical products or goods or resources. You could be good at monetizing a hobby or turning a casual interest into a side hustle if you commit to it, actually. You could also be good at crafting foolproof, step-by-step plans, like for businesses or financial systems, could be with anything really. And you could be good at cultivating a slow, grounding, and high-quality aesthetic within your environment. You could be good at creating things of value. And so to experiment with this, take one abstract idea you have and write down the exact steps required to turn it into a physical, sellable product or a measurable asset or something useful, because that's how you can really channel your talent. When the ruler of your fifth house is in the third house, your creativity could shine through mental agility, communication, and quick information exchange. And you could find joy in bouncing between multiple interests to keep your mind stimulated, or through using your mind to create whatever it is that you find joy in. And so, some creative talents you could have is you could be very good at writing. That's kind of the obvious one, or speaking, coding, or kind of synthesizing complex data sets. You could be, very witty. You could have clever wordplay, and you could be good at comedy comedy as well, and you could captivate an audience this way. And you could be good at connecting people or ideas within your local environment or your network that wouldn't otherwise go together. And you could also be good at building multiple, quick drafts of a project rather than waiting for perfection. And you could be good at experimenting with what real creativity looks like for you. And so to experiment, try to force two completely unrelated concepts together today, like maybe writing a highly technical manual in the format of a casual story, just to see how your brain kind of comes up with things. When the ruler of your fifth house is in the fourth house, your creativity could revolve around building comfort, emotional security, preserving the past, and kind of rooting your creations in something very deep or authentic. And you could draw your best inspiration from your own emotional memories. And so some creative talents you could have, the literal ones could be, interior design, organizing a home, or creating physically comforting spaces, even in places that aren't home-like. You could be good at cooking or hospitality or cultivating a deeply safe environment for a team or a person. You could also be good at preserving history, maybe memory archiving, working in human resources. And you could be the type who could read the mood of a room and execute decisions entirely through that emotional knowing of, what is needed to root the environment. And so to experiment with these concepts, try to create a specific environment today, whether through lighting or cooking or organizing a desk, intended to recreate the exact feeling of a comforting memory or something that will really appeal to people. With the ruler of your fifth house in the fifth house, it's exalted or in domicile, so your creativity could be bold or playful or purely expressive, obviously matching the nature of the sign of your fifth house. And so you could be fueled by a deep desire to leave a personal mark and inject your signature style into everything you do, no matter what that style is. And so you could be very good at entertaining, performing, maybe commanding a spotlight with whichever niche, creation that you make. You could inject, authentic and very raw energy into, your daily life or into whatever it is that you create. You could be very good at acting as a champion for others and hyping them up to be braver, kind of instructing them on how to be brave. And you could also be good at creating something that is, very like the best at its niche, whether it's, the best art, the best content, or the best projects that refuse to be ignored, obviously matching the nature of the sign of your ruling planet. And so to experiment, take a totally boring thing in your life, something that doesn't have form, and execute it in your own unique style, just so you can figure out what that style looks like. With the ruler of your fifth house in the sixth house, your creativity could thrive on optimization, service, mastering the details, and you could find a joyous flow state in fixing what is broken and organizing the systems in your life. And so some creative talents you could have is you could be good at editing or refining or polishing your projects down to a perfect state. So whatever you do, you could do it perfectly. You could be good at maybe creating hyper efficient daily workflows or highly useful systems. You could be good at organizing a physical or digital space so that it is clean or minimalist and very functional. And you could be good at executing or, taking on practical skills or hobbies with such technical mastery that it leaves people in awe, no matter what it is. It could be an art, could be a science, you name it. And so to experiment, maybe take a piece of work you've already finished or, something that you've always wanted to do and actively edit it and refine it and find joy in the process of, actually refining and optimizing whatever it is that you're making so that you can figure out how your true talent can be channeled. With the ruler of the fifth house in the seventh house, your creativity could be sparked by collaboration, harmony, connection. It could be how you relate to other people. And you could find that your best ideas or creations come by bouncing thoughts off of other people and maybe creating balance within that and considering other people's opinions, because that is ultimately going to be your audience in some way. And so creative talents you could have could include maybe co-creating what, like a piece of art or a space, for example, or a project with another person. You could be good at mediating group dynamics and restoring peace in chaotic office or home environments. You could also be good at maybe creating harmony or symmetry in design, fashion, physical spaces. You could be good at making whatever you create very appealing. And you could be good at designing incredibly fair workflows or policies or conceptual frameworks that do consider outside perspectives. So, to experiment, try to actively collaborate on something and ask a peer, a family member, a friend to act as a sounding board to allow their input to shape what you create so that you can figure out how your collaborative energy helps you to create something beautiful or something useful or something that brings you joy. If the ruler of your fifth house is in the eighth house, your creativity could involve deep investigation and powerful transformations, and you could prefer to dive obsessively into complex subjects and completely overhaul existing structures or to use the deep parts of life maybe as your muse. And so, some creative talents you could have is maybe dismantling broken business models or concepts and rebuilding and creating them to be stronger. You could be good at deep dive research, psychological analysis, or solving intense, complex puzzles that could bring you joy. You could be good at managing crisis by radiating a quiet or capable or highly focused presence that can help ground, the environment around you. And you could be good at maybe asking the uncomfortable questions that strip away the superficial noise in a group. And you could also be good at creating something by taking the deepest parts of whatever project that you're creating, really understanding them, and then transforming whatever you're creating into a very, effective and powerful final product. And so to experiment, maybe take something that you want to create and completely change its form into something powerful and figure out, how do you dive into the subject and how do you change the subject? Because this will help you to understand how your talent and your creative ability can be channeled. With the ruler of your fifth house in the ninth house, your creativity could operate on a massive scale. You could be good at focusing on the big picture and really moving things forward to a big vision. You could be good at creating something out of a vision, and you could draw inspiration from diverse cultures, philosophies, or wide open spaces. So, some creative talents you could have is you could be good at scaling a tiny, localized idea into a massive, overarching project that really illustrates something big. You could be good at teaching, mentoring, or pointing a team up towards a shared inspired vision. And you could be good at maybe using blunt, hilarious truths to create whatever it is that you want to create. And you could be good at generating maybe broad, visionary concepts without getting bogged down into the details. And you could be good at creating with those. And so to experiment, maybe take an immediate local problem and map out how it applies to a much larger global system, and then create something out of that muse and focus entirely on the big picture. When the ruler of your fifth house is in the 10th house, your creativity could be highly structured. Focus on building a lasting legacy and establishing boundaries. And you could find joy in taking leadership and creating something out of, enduring frameworks or creating something that is built to last or something that is meant to inspire on a big level. And so some creative talents you could have is maybe drafting a literal step-by-step blueprint to turn an abstract goal into reality. You could be good at treating a weekend passion project with a discipline that can really scale into something big and visible. You could be good at delivering highly functional, realistic solutions, filtering all the unnecessary noise out, and you could be good at leading and inspiring people through that. And you could be good at projecting a commanding vision in whatever it is that you do create. So, to experiment with this, take a vague goal you have and draft a literal blueprint of the exact steps required to build it into reality. And then, no matter how long it takes, try to execute it. With the ruler of the fifth house in the 11th house, your creativity could be unconventional. You could be focused on, creating something that is inspiring to the larger web. You could be good at systems thinking, and you could have joy in, maybe connecting whatever it is that you're creating to an audience, maybe posting it online. But you could also maybe derive your muse from society. And so some creative talents you could have is you could be good at utilizing, technology, unorthodox tools, or social media to really put your vision out there. So if you do have a vision, don't be afraid to publish it. You could be good at organizing networks, communities, or groups around a shared goal. You could be good at delivering brilliant, out of the box insights or creations with your own unique touch. And you could act as a completely objective, rational person who can create something out of, maybe really tough, societal causes or really tough societal dynamics, you could turn that into something joyous and beautiful. So to experiment with this, look at maybe a problem that you have as if you were 30,000 feet in the air and look at it from a systemic angle, and then take that idea and create something out of it, create a solution or a piece of art, whatever it may be, because it can help you understand what your talent is. With the ruler of your fifth house in the 12th house, your creativity could be highly intuitive. You could flow best behind the scenes. And so you could find joy in merging completely with an activity, a hobby, a piece of art, whatever it may be, and allowing things to unfold naturally without forcing them. And so some creative talents you could have is you could maybe communicate or create through your complex feelings. You could create art that has symbols, visual layouts. Maybe you're good with music. You could also be good at inducing a trance-like flow state when you are, engaging in creation or fun or hobbies. You could be good at maybe taking a muse that derives from the unspoken vibe or energetic data of a room and really make whatever it is you're creating, appeal to other people because you can read that vibe. And you could be good at creating when you work behind the scenes to let a project take shape just, by letting your subconscious take the wheel almost. And so to experiment with this, try communicating a complex thought to somebody today without using actual words. You can use an image, a reference, a song, because this can help you to realize how your unspoken talents can actually take shape.